Hey friends, welcome to the Horror Sleep. Almost 90% of you watching aren't subscribed. If you enjoy these true park ranger horror stories, hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps the channel. Oh, and where are you watching from tonight? Let me know in the comments. My name is Miles, and for 11 years, I was a backcountry ranger in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, located just on the edge of Yellowstone itself, reaching back into Montana. If you've never been there, let me describe it to you. 14,000-foot peaks that shave 12,000 feet off through the sky like a machete. Glacial lakes so blue and clear you can see 20 feet down into their depths, and forests so dense you're walking through twilight even in the middle of the day. It's a place that makes you realize just how small you are. And after a while in a place like that, you begin to grasp that not always being small can sometimes be a bad thing. What most people imagine park rangers doing is pointing visitors in the direction of the local caves on some tourist's first day, or taking pictures with families from Ohio. And yes, my sister, my cousin, lots of my other friends did just that, manning the visitor centers down in Gardner or Cook City. But my role was different. I worked in the backcountry, where the trails end and the game trails begin, where 2 weeks can pass without seeing another soul. My beat encompassed an area of maybe 300 square miles of mountain backwoods, where, come the summer, I spent 20 out of every 30 days camping in a wall tent, at an altitude where the merely thought of an idea left a man breathless. The summer of 2014 started like any other. I packed out in early June, just after the snowmelt made the high passes navigable again, and set up my base camp near a place called Echo Ridge. The ridge got its name because of the way sound bounced between two parallel cliff faces, creating these perfect, crystalline echoes that would repeat your voice back to you 5, 6, sometimes 7 times before finally fading into silence. It was unsettling at first, hearing your own words thrown back at you over and over. But after a while, I started to find it comforting. At least out there, something always answered when you called. My main responsibilities were trail maintenance, wildlife monitoring, and what we called backcountry presence, which was really just a fancy way of saying I was supposed to check on the handful of backpackers crazy enough to venture that far from civilization. Most summers, I'd encounter maybe 30 or 40 people total spread across 4 months. These weren't your casual day hikers. These were serious backcountry folks, the kind who packed bear spray and satellite phones and knew how to hang a food cache properly. The kind who respected the wilderness because they understood what it could do to you if you didn't. The first strange thing happened in mid-July. I'd been out for about 6 weeks at that point, and I was making my usual circuit, a 3-day loop that took me past the 5 most popular camping areas in my sector. On the second day, I was hiking up toward a spot called Granite Basin when I heard voices. Not unusual, obviously, but something about them made me pause. They were too loud, too careless. I could hear laughter echoing off the canyon walls, the kind of booming, beer-soaked laughter that told me these weren't experienced backpackers. When I crested the ridge and looked down into Granite Basin, I saw them. 4 guys in their mid-20s, clearly on some kind of bachelor party trip, judging by the matching t-shirts. They'd set up camp right on the shore of the basin's lake, which was technically legal, but they'd also left their food sitting out on a picnic table they must have hauled in, and I could see empty beer cans scattered around their campsite. I made my way down and introduced myself. They were friendly enough, if a little drunk, and after I explained the importance of proper food storage and leave-no-trace principles, they seemed receptive. One of them, the groom-to-be, I assumed, was a big guy with a sunburned face who kept calling me Ranger Dude and asking if I'd ever seen a grizzly up close. I told him I had, plenty of times, and that he should hope he never did. Before I left, I did my usual spiel about safety protocols. I told them to make noise on the trails, to check in with the ranger station when they got back down, and to never, under any circumstances, try to find their way out after dark if they got turned around. "Wait for daylight," I said. "Always wait for daylight. The mountains play tricks on you at night." The sunburned guy laughed and said, "What kind of tricks?" I looked at him for a long moment, debating how much to say. Finally, I told him, "The kind that make you walk in circles for 6 hours, thinking you're heading toward a road. The kind that make familiar landmarks look completely different. Up here, your brain starts filling in blanks that shouldn't be filled. You see what you expect to see, not what's really there." He nodded, but I could tell he thought I was being dramatic. They always do. I left them around 3 in the afternoon and continued my patrol. By nightfall, I was camped about 4 miles north, near a tributary stream. I made dinner, wrote some notes in my logbook, and was just about to turn in when I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a scream, not an animal scream, a human scream, high-pitched, terrified, and cut short almost immediately. It came from the south, from the direction of Granite Basin. I grabbed my radio, but I was too far from any repeater to get a signal. That was the thing about working in the high country. You were alone, completely alone, and if something went wrong, you had to handle it yourself. I stuffed my sleeping bag, grabbed my first aid kit and flashlight, and started moving south through the dark. I know I'd just finished telling those guys to never travel at night, but this was different. This was an emergency, and I knew these trails well enough to navigate them blindfolded if I had to. The hike that had taken me an hour and a half in daylight took nearly 3 hours in the dark. My flashlight beam carved a narrow tunnel through the blackness, and every few minutes I'd stop and listen, hoping to hear another sound, anything that might tell me what was happening. But the night was silent. Not the peaceful kind of silent either. It was the heavy, oppressive silence you get when every living thing in the forest has simultaneously decided to hold its breath. When I finally reached the ridge overlooking Granite Basin, I stopped and scanned the area below with my flashlight. Their campfire was still burning, which was a relief. I could see the orange glow reflecting off the water, and as I made my way down into the basin, I called out, announcing myself so I wouldn't startle them. No one answered. I called again, louder this time. Still nothing. When I reached their campsite, I found it empty. Not abandoned, empty. The fire was burning strong, recently stoked, judging by the fresh logs. Their tents were still up, their gear was still scattered around, and the food they'd left out was untouched, but there wasn't a single person in sight. I checked each tent. Sleeping bags, packs, personal items, all there. I walked the perimeter of the camp, my flashlight beam scanning the ground for tracks. I found plenty, dozens of boot prints in the dirt around the fire pit, but none leading away from camp. It was like they'd all simultaneously vanished into thin air. I called out again, my voice bouncing off the canyon walls. "This is Ranger Miles. If you can hear me, respond." And then I heard it. An echo, but not my echo. It was one of their voices, I was sure of it. The sunburned guy. I heard him call out, faint and distant, "Help! We're lost!" I spun around, trying to pinpoint the direction. It seemed to come from the north, back the way I'd come. I shouted again, "Where are you? Keep talking!" His voice came back, but this time it seemed to be coming from the east. "We can't find the camp. Everything looks the same." I felt a chill run down my spine that had nothing to do with the temperature. I keyed my radio, even though I knew it was useless. Static. I made a decision. I couldn't search for them effectively in the dark, not with just one flashlight and no backup. The smart thing to do was to wait for daylight, mark their camp, and organize a proper search with additional rangers. But the smart thing felt wrong. Those guys were out there, scared and disoriented, and every minute I waited was another minute they could be walking themselves into danger. I spent the next 4 hours searching. I widened my circle from their campsite, calling out every few minutes, listening for responses. And I got them. Voices, distant and directionless, always seeming to come from somewhere different. Sometimes I'd hear the sunburned guy. Sometimes I'd hear one of the others. Once, I heard what sounded like all 4 of them talking at once, but the words were garbled, overlapping, impossible to understand. By the time dawn started to lighten the eastern sky, I was exhausted and no closer to finding them. I made my way back to their campsite, and that's when I saw something that made my stomach drop. Footprints, fresh ones, leading into camp from the west. Not 4 sets, 1 set, and they were barefoot. I followed them to the largest tent and looked inside. There was one of the guys, the quiet one who hadn't said much the day before, curled up in his sleeping bag. He was shivering, his lips were blue, and his feet were cut up and bloody. But he was alive. I got him awake, wrapped him in a thermal blanket, and tried to get him to tell me what happened. At first, he wouldn't speak. He just stared at me with wide, terrified eyes like he wasn't entirely sure I was real. Finally, after I got some hot coffee into him, he started talking. We were sitting around the fire, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Garrett, the groom, he wanted to go look at the stars. Said it'd be better away from the firelight. So we all walked out maybe 50 yards, just to the edge of the trees. We were only gone a few minutes, but when we turned around, he stopped, his hands shaking around the coffee cup. When we turned around, what? I pressed. The camp was gone, he said. The fire, the tents, everything, just gone. And then we heard something. Someone calling. It sounded like you, the ranger, saying you were at the camp, asking where we were. So we started walking toward the voice. But every time we got close, it would move, and we'd follow it. And it kept moving. How long did you follow it? Hours, he said. It felt like hours. We were walking in circles, I think. I don't know. Everything looked the same. The trees, the rocks, all of it. And then I realized I couldn't see the others anymore. I was alone. I tried to call out, but when I did, I heard my own voice calling back to me from somewhere else. Not an echo. My voice, saying things I wasn't saying. He looked at me, and I saw tears running down his face. I walked all night. I don't know how I found my way back. I just kept walking, and then suddenly, there was the camp. The fire was still going. Everything was exactly where we left it. But the others... He trailed off. I radioed for help as soon as I was in range, and by noon we had a full search and rescue operation underway. Helicopters, dog teams, the works. It took 3 days, but we found the other 3 men. They were all alive, though barely. One was 7 miles west of the camp, another was 9 miles east, and the sunburned guy, Garrett, was found less than a mile away, sitting on a rock outcropping overlooking the basin. When the rescue team reached him, he was holding his satellite phone, which had full battery and clear signal, but he hadn't used it. When they asked him why, he said he'd been waiting. Waiting for what, he couldn't or wouldn't say. All 4 of them told similar stories. They'd followed voices, gotten separated, wandered through the night. All 4 described the same sensation of the forest looking unfamiliar despite having just walked through it hours earlier. And all 4 mentioned hearing voices that sounded like people they knew saying things that didn't make sense. The official report called it a case of mass panic and disorientation. The Forest Service determined that the group, inexperienced and likely intoxicated, had simply made a series of poor decisions that resulted in them getting separated and lost in the dark. The case was closed, and the 4 men were cited for improper food storage and given a stern warning about backcountry travel. But I knew it was more than that. I knew because I'd spent that night searching for them, and I'd heard the voices too. I'd heard them calling from impossible directions, heard words that didn't match the movement of sound through space. I'd felt the forest shift around me, familiar landmarks becoming strange, trails I'd walked 100 times suddenly feeling wrong. I didn't put any of that in my report. What would I say? That the mountains had played tricks? That the night had swallowed those men and spit them back out changed? No one would believe that. Hell, I barely believed it myself. But I'll tell you what I did believe. Something up there doesn't want us around after dark. And I started to think that maybe, just maybe, those echoes on Echo Ridge weren't just sound bouncing off rock. Maybe they were something else answering back. After the incident at Granite Basin, I requested a reassignment. Not a transfer, just a shift to a different sector, somewhere lower in elevation, somewhere with more traffic. My supervisor, a grizzled old ranger named Patterson who'd been working the Absarokas since before I was born, denied the request. He called me into his office at the Gardner station in late July and sat me down with a cup of terrible coffee and a look that said he knew more than he was letting on. "You're rattled," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded. There was no point in lying to Patterson. He'd seen everything these mountains had to offer, and if anyone would understand, it would be him. "I've been doing this job for 33 years, Patterson said, leaning back in his chair. "And I've learned that the high country has its own rules. They're not our rules. They don't make sense by our logic, but they're there, and they're consistent, and if you respect them, the mountains will let you do your job." "What rules?" I asked. He took a long sip of coffee, his eyes never leaving mine. "Never travel alone at night. Never follow a voice you can't source. Never trust your compass when the moon is dark. And never, under any circumstances, answer an echo." I felt my skin prickle. Answer an echo? You hear your voice come back. You let it go. You don't respond to it. You don't engage. You acknowledge it happened and you move on. Because sometimes what comes back isn't your voice at all. It's something else wearing your voice, and if you answer it, you're giving it permission to get closer. I wanted to ask him what he meant, what he'd experienced that led him to these rules, but the look on his face told me the conversation was over. He approved my request for a week of R&R, told me to go down to Bozeman, stay in a hotel, eat some good food, and clear my head. "You're one of my best," he said as I left. "Don't let one weird night make you forget that." I took his advice. I spent a week in Bozeman, sleeping in a real bed, eating at restaurants, talking to people about normal things like weather and sports and politics. It helped. By the time I drove back up to the mountains, I felt grounded again, ready to finish out the season. But when I got back to my sector in early August, I found out that I wasn't the only ranger who'd had a strange experience that summer. Elena was another backcountry ranger, assigned to a sector about 15 miles west of mine. We'd crossed paths a few times over the years, usually at supply depots or during quarterly training sessions. She was sharp, competent, and tough as nails. The kind of ranger who could hike 20 miles with a 50-pound pack and still have enough energy to cook a full meal when she got to camp. I ran into her at the Cook City Supply Depot in mid-August. She was restocking her first aid kit, and when she saw me, she waved me over with an urgency that immediately put me on edge. "You heard about the Pritchards?" she asked. I shook my head. "Who are the Pritchards?" "Married couple, late 50s, experienced backpackers." They had a permit for a week-long trek through the western quadrant of my sector. They were supposed to check in at the ranger station on August 4th. They never showed. My stomach tightened. When did they go missing? That's the thing, Elena said. We don't know. Their permit started on July 28th, but when we went to look for them, we found their truck still parked at the trailhead. Food in the cooler, gear in the back. It's like they never even started the hike. Maybe they changed their minds, I offered, though I didn't believe it. That's what I thought at first, Elena said. But then we checked the trail register at the trailhead. They'd signed in. July 28th, 6:47 a.m. Both signatures. Both confirmed it was them by the handwriting analysis. So they started the hike. They just never made it to their first planned camp. You find any trace of them on the trail? Elena hesitated, then lowered her voice even though we were the only two people in the depot. We found something. About 3 miles up the trail, there's a place where Minor Creek crosses the path. The bridge was out, had been for a couple weeks after a storm. There's a clearly marked detour that adds maybe half a mile to the route. We found boot prints going toward the detour. 2 sets, the right size to match the Pritchards, but then the prints just stop. Stop? Stop. Middle of the trail. Not at a rock outcropping where they could have jumped. Not at a stream crossing. Just a flat, open section of trail, and the prints stop like someone hit pause on their existence. I felt that familiar chill creep up my spine. What does the official report say? Animal attack, probably. Theory is a bear or mountain lion surprised them, dragged them off the trail. But Miles, I walked that area 6 times with dogs. There's no blood, no signs of struggle, no drag marks, nothing. And the dogs couldn't pick up a scent beyond where the footprints stopped. It's like the Pritchards walked 3 miles into the wilderness and then ceased to exist. We stood in silence for a moment, both of us processing what this meant. Finally, I told her about what had happened at Granite Basin. I told her everything, including the parts I'd left out of my official report. When I finished, she nodded slowly. Patterson give you the rules? She asked. Yeah, you too? Last year, after I had my own incident. She glanced around, making sure we were still alone. I was on a night patrol near Abundance Basin. This was September, so the temperature was already dropping below freezing at night. I was checking on a solo camper, some photographer who had a permit to camp near the lake. When I got there, his tent was empty. His camera was set up on a tripod, pointed at the lake, and the timer was running. I checked the display, and the last photo taken was from about an hour before I arrived. It showed him standing at the edge of the lake, looking out at the water. Where was he? Gone. I searched all night. Called in a rescue team at dawn. We found him 2 days later, 12 miles away, hypothermic but alive. When he recovered enough to talk, he said he'd heard someone calling his name from across the lake. He thought it was another camper in distress, so he grabbed his flashlight and started walking around the shore to help. He walked for what he thought was 20 minutes, but when he checked his watch, 4 hours had passed. He said the lake kept getting longer, the shoreline kept extending, and no matter how far he walked, he could never reach the voice. Jesus, I breathed. He also said the stars were wrong, Elena added. He was an amateur astronomer, knew the constellations inside and out, but that night, he said the stars were in the wrong positions. He couldn't find the North Star, couldn't orient himself. It was like he'd walked into a different version of the wilderness where the fundamental rules of reality didn't apply. I didn't know what to say. These weren't stories you could put in reports. They weren't things you could explain to your supervisor or your colleagues. They were experiences that lived in the space between the official world and the real world, and if you talked about them too openly, people would start questioning your fitness for duty. But Elena and I, we understood each other. We'd both seen it. We'd both felt it. and we both knew that whatever was happening up in the high country, it was getting worse. "I'm going back out in 2 days," Elena said. "Keep your radio on Channel 7. If anything else happens, I'll reach out." I agreed, and we parted ways. As I drove back up to my sector, I couldn't shake the feeling that the mountains were watching me. That sounds dramatic, I know, but that's exactly how it felt. Like the peaks and valleys weren't just geography. Like they had awareness. Like they had intent. I made it back to Echo Ridge without incident and settled back into my routine. Patrol, maintenance, wildlife observation. The days were warm, the nights were cool, and for a couple of weeks everything seemed normal. I checked in with a handful of backpackers, all of whom were respectful and well prepared. I saw elk, mule deer, a black bear with cubs. I watched thunderstorms roll through the valleys and marveled at the way lightning would dance between the peaks. It was beautiful. It was peaceful. And then, on August 23rd, everything went to hell. I was camped near the southern edge of my sector, about 6 miles from the nearest trailhead. It was a Sunday night, and I was listening to a Mariners game on my small battery-powered radio, half paying attention while I cooked dinner. The sun was just starting to set, painting the western sky in shades of orange and purple, and I was thinking about how lucky I was to have a job that let me experience moments like this. Then my radio crackled. Not the portable radio I used for the baseball game, my work radio, the one connected to the Forest Service frequency. "Miles, you there?" It was Elena's voice, but something was wrong. She sounded terrified. I grabbed the radio. "Elena? What's wrong?" Static, then her voice again, breaking up. "Something's wrong with the camp. It's not where it should be." "What do you mean? Are you lost?" "No, yes, I don't know." More static. "I'm at Red Cliff Camp. I've been here a dozen times, but it's different. Everything's different. The cliff face is on the wrong side. The stream is flowing the wrong direction. And there are tents here, Miles. Tents I've never seen before." My blood ran cold. "Are there people?" "I don't know. I'm afraid to check." "Elena, listen to me. You need to—" The radio went dead. I tried to call her back. Nothing. I tried the emergency frequency. Nothing. I grabbed my gear and my map and started plotting the fastest route to her sector. Red Cliff Camp was about 18 miles from my position, most of it cross-country. In daylight, with good weather, I could make it in 8 to 10 hours. In the dark, it would take twice that long. But I didn't have a choice. I packed light, grabbed my headlamp and emergency beacon and started moving. The temperature was dropping fast, down into the 40s, and I could see my breath misting in the beam of my headlamp. I pushed hard, maintaining a pace that would have been aggressive even in daylight, using the stars to navigate when the trail wasn't clear. Around midnight, I stopped to check my position. I was making good time, better than expected. I should reach Red Cliff Camp by mid-morning if I kept up this pace. I took a drink from my water bottle, adjusted my pack, and was about to start moving again when I heard something that stopped me cold. Elena's voice, calling my name. But it wasn't coming from my radio. It was coming from the forest to my left. I turned slowly, shining my headlamp into the trees. Nothing, just darkness and the faint rustle of wind through pine needles. "Miles," her voice called again, and this time I could pinpoint the direction. Northwest, maybe 50 yards away. "Miles, help me! I'm lost!" Every instinct I had screamed at me not to respond. Patterson's rule echoed in my head. Never follow a voice you can't source. But it sounded so much like Elena, scared, desperate, exactly how she'd sounded on the radio. I took one step toward the voice, then another. "Miles, please. I can't find my way back." I stopped. Something was wrong. Elena was at Red Cliff Camp, 18 miles away. There was no possible way her voice could be coming from these trees. And the way she was saying my name, the cadence, the tone, it was just slightly off. Like someone doing an impression of Elena, rather than Elena herself. Miles? The voice was closer now, though I hadn't heard anyone moving through the underbrush. Miles, why won't you help me? I backed away, slowly, never taking my eyes off the dark space between the trees. The voice called out again, but this time it sounded angry, accusatory. I thought you were my friend, Miles. I turned and ran. I don't know how long I ran. Time felt elastic, stretching and compressing in ways that didn't make sense. My lungs burned, my legs ached, but I didn't stop until I broke out of the tree line and found myself at the edge of a high, alpine meadow. The moon was up now, nearly full, and it bathed the landscape in pale silver light. I collapsed against a boulder, gasping for breath, and checked my compass. West. I was still heading west toward Red Cliff Camp. Good. I forced myself to stand, to keep moving, even though every fiber of my being wanted to curl up and wait for daylight. That's when I saw the tent. It was set up in the middle of the meadow, maybe 100 yards away. A small backpacking tent, dark green, with a faint glow coming from inside. Someone had a lantern or flashlight running. I approached, cautiously, calling out as I got closer. Hello? Forest Service, is everything okay? No response. I reached the tent and knelt down. The zipper was partway open. I could see the glow more clearly now, a small battery-powered lantern sitting in the corner. And I could see a sleeping bag, but I couldn't tell if someone was in it. Hello? I called again, louder this time. Nothing. I reached for the zipper, and that's when I heard it. A voice from inside the tent. My voice. Don't open it, my voice said. Please don't open it. I jerked my hand back like I'd touched a hot stove. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. Who's in there? I demanded, though I already knew the answer. Nothing. Nothing was in there. Nothing that should exist anyway. The voice spoke again, still using my voice, but the words were wrong. Scrambled, like someone had cut up a recording of me talking and rearranged the pieces randomly. The mountains are watching, my voice said from inside the tent. They've always been watching, and now they're calling us home. I stood up and backed away. The tent remained motionless, that faint glow still emanating from within. I thought about running again, but I was exhausted, and I still had miles to go before I reached Elena. Instead, I made a decision that probably saved my life. I turned my back on the tent and walked away, forcing myself to maintain a steady pace, forcing myself not to look back. Behind me, I heard the tent zipper slowly opening, heard the soft rustle of fabric. But I didn't turn around. I didn't look, I just kept walking. By the time the sun came up, I had covered another 6 miles. I was running on pure adrenaline at that point, and when I finally saw the distinctive red cliff face that gave the camp its name, I almost wept with relief. But my relief was short-lived. The camp was empty, no Elena, no mysterious tents, just a standard Forest Service campsite with a fire ring and a food cache pole. Everything was exactly where it should be, exactly as it had always been. I called her name. No answer. I searched the area looking for any sign that she'd been there. I found nothing, and then my radio crackled. Miles? It was Elena. She sounded fine, normal, confused. Why are you at Red Cliff? I'm at Indian Basin, where I'm supposed to be. I stared at the radio, my mind struggling to process what I was hearing. Elena, you called me last night. You said something was wrong with the camp. A long pause, then, Miles, I haven't used my radio since yesterday afternoon. I've been at Indian Basin all night. What are you talking about? I felt the world tilt beneath my feet. The voice I'd heard on the radio last night hadn't been Elena. The voice I'd heard in the forest calling my name hadn't been Elena. And the voice I'd heard coming from inside that tent, using my own words against me, definitely hadn't been me. I radioed Patterson and requested immediate extraction. I told him I was experiencing equipment malfunction and possible exposure-related confusion. He sent a helicopter, and by noon, I was back at the Gardner station, sitting in the same chair I'd sat in a month earlier, drinking the same terrible coffee. Patterson looked at me for a long time before speaking. "You ready to tell me what really happened?" I told him everything. Every detail, no matter how impossible it sounded. When I finished, he nodded slowly, like I'd just confirmed something he'd suspected all along. "The mountains are changing," he said quietly. "I don't know why. Maybe it's always been like this and we're just now noticing. Maybe something's shifting up there, something we don't have words for. But I do know this. The high country doesn't belong to us anymore. If it ever did." He pulled a form out of his desk drawer and slid it across to me. It was a transfer request, already filled out, already approved. A position at Crater Lake in Oregon, lower elevation, more visitors, less isolation. "You've done good work here," Patterson said, "but your time in the Absarokas is done. Sign the form, take a month off, and report to Crater Lake on October 1st. I signed without hesitation. As I left his office, Patterson called after me. "Miles, those rules I gave you?" I turned. "There's one more," he said. "If the mountains call to you, don't answer. Not ever. Because once you answer, once you engage with whatever's up there, it knows you. And it won't let you go." I think about that conversation often, especially now that I've been away from the Absarokas for years. I think about Elena, who requested a transfer to the Black Hills shortly after I left. I think about the Pritchards, whose bodies were never found. I think about those 4 guys from the bachelor party who all swore they'd never set foot in wilderness again. But mostly, I think about the night I walked away from that tent in the meadow. I think about the sound of the zipper opening behind me. I think about what might have happened if I'd looked back, and I'm grateful I never found out. I'd been at Crater Lake for about 7 months when I got the call from Patterson. It was late April, and I was settling into my new position, enjoying the relative normalcy of a park where the biggest concerns were managing tourist traffic and preventing people from doing stupid things like trying to swim in a 400-foot-deep volcanic lake. "Miles," Patterson's voice was rough, strained in a way I'd never heard before. "I need you to come back." "Back to the Absarokas?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Patterson, I can't. I'm assigned here now, and it's Elena," he interrupted. "She's missing." My blood went cold. "What happened?" "She transferred to the Black Hills like you did," Patterson said. "But she came back 3 weeks ago, volunteered for a special assignment, said she had unfinished business." "What kind of assignment?" "Investigation into the Pritchard disappearance. New evidence surfaced. A hiker found a backpack about 15 miles from where they were last seen. Forensics confirmed it belonged to Mrs. Pritchard. Elena volunteered to do a sweep of the area with a small team. She went out 5 days ago and hasn't checked in since." I felt my stomach drop. "Have you sent search and rescue?" "They've been out there for 2 days. Found Elena's camp, found her gear, radio's there, beacons there, everything's there. But Elena's gone, and Miles..." He paused. "They found something else, something I need you to see in person. I can't explain it over the phone." I knew I should say no. I knew going back to the Absarokas was a terrible idea, but Elena had been there for me when I needed someone to understand what I'd experienced. I owed her. "I'll be there in 2 days," Ayatisha said. Patterson picked me up at the Bozeman airport on a gray, drizzly afternoon. He looked older, more worn than I remembered. The drive up to the mountains was quiet, neither of us wanting to discuss what we both knew we'd have to face. When we arrived at the Forward Operations Center, a temporary command post set up at a trailhead, I was introduced to the search and rescue coordinator, a woman named Sarah who'd been leading the effort to find Elena. She briefed me on what they'd discovered. Elena's last known position was at a place called Mirror Creek, Sarah explained, pointing to a location on a topographic map. She was supposed to be doing a grid search of this entire area, looking for any trace of the Pritchards. According to her log, she set up base camp on the evening of April 19th and planned to start the search the following morning. But she never started, I asked. We don't know, Sarah said. Her tent was empty when we arrived, but all her equipment suggests she'd spent at least one night there. She'd used her camp stove, her sleeping bag had been slept in, and her log had an entry dated April 20th at 6:15 a.m. But that's where things get strange. She handed me a photocopy of Elena's log. I read the final entry. April 20th, 6:15 a.m. Slept poorly. Strange dreams about walking through a forest where all the trees were upside down, roots reaching towards the sky. Woke at 5:30 to find fresh boot prints circling my tent. Size 9, women's, consistent with my boots. But I didn't leave the tent during the night. Beginning grid search at Sector Alpha 1, expected return to camp by 1800 hours. I looked up at Sarah. Boot prints circling her tent? From the inside or outside? Outside, Sarah said. We found them too. Perfect impressions in the soft dirt. They circled the tent exactly 7 times, then head northeast into the forest. We followed them for about 2 miles before they disappeared at a rock formation. Disappeared how? The same way the Pritchards' prints disappeared. Mid-stride, no explanation. Our tracking dogs lost the scent at the exact same spot. Patterson spoke up. That's not the strangest part. Show him the photos, Sarah. Sarah pulled out a tablet and brought up a series of photographs. They showed Elena's campsite from various angles, standard documentation for a search and rescue operation. But then she swiped to a series of photos that made my breath catch. They were pictures of trees. Dozens of them, all within a 100-yard radius of Elena's camp. And carved into the bark of each tree at roughly chest height was a symbol I'd never seen before. It looked like a spiral with 7 lines radiating outward, almost like a stylized sun. What is this? I asked. We don't know, Sarah said. But here's the thing. These carvings weren't here when Elena set up camp. We know because one of the search team members, a guy named Rodriguez, he'd hiked through this exact area just 6 days earlier on a routine patrol. He's adamant these trees were unmarked when he passed through. Patterson leaned forward. Which means someone carved these symbols into 73 different trees in the space of less than a week. We're talking about a huge amount of work, all done in remote wilderness, all without being seen by any other hikers or rangers. Or, Sarah said quietly, they appeared some other way. I looked between them. You're saying these might not be man-made? I'm saying we have to consider all possibilities, Sarah replied. Because nothing about this situation makes conventional sense. I studied the photos more closely. The carvings were precise, uniform, like they'd been made with a template. And there was something about them that made my eyes hurt if I looked too long, like the spiral was trying to pull my gaze inward. I need to see the site in person, I said. Patterson nodded. I was hoping you'd say that. We've got a helicopter standing by. We can have you up there in 20 minutes. The flight over the Absarokas was beautiful in a terrible way. The peaks looked sharper than I remembered, the valleys deeper. As we approached Mirror Creek, I felt that familiar sensation of being watched, that weight of attention from something vast and incomprehensible. The helicopter set down in a small clearing about a quarter-mile from Elena's camp, and Patterson, Sarah, and I hiked the rest of the way. The forest was silent, completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind. Just our footsteps on the trail and the sound of our breathing. When we reached the camp, I saw immediately what had disturbed them. The site was pristine, orderly, exactly how a experienced ranger would leave it. But the trees around it, those 73 trees with their strange carvings, they formed a perfect circle. Not approximate, perfect. Like someone had used a compass to mark out the locations before carving the symbols. I walked the perimeter slowly, examining each carving. They were all identical, all carved to the same depth. And when I reached the 73rd tree, I found something that made my blood run cold. Fresh carving, still oozing sap. Not of the spiral symbol. This was different. This was text. Letters carved in shaky, desperate strokes. Don't trust the echoes. Below that, 3 words that made me turn and look at Patterson with horror. They were voices. She was here, I breathed. Elena was here, and she carved this recently. Sarah pulled out her radio. All teams, we have a new lead. Subject may still be in the area. Expand search radius to... Wait, I said, holding up a hand. Listen. We all fell silent. At first, I heard nothing. Then, faintly, from somewhere to the northeast, I heard Elena's voice. Help! Someone help me! I'm hurt! Sarah immediately keyed her radio. All teams, we have audio contact with subject, moving to investigate. She looked at me. You coming? I wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed at me to grab Patterson and get back to the helicopter. But I couldn't leave Elena out there, not if there was even a chance she was really calling for help. We moved toward the voice, Sarah leading the way with her GPS and radio. The voice called out again, clearer this time. I'm at the rocks, the big granite formation. Please hurry. I knew those rocks. They were about a mile northeast, a distinctive outcropping that served as a landmark for navigation. We picked up our pace, half jogging through the forest, and within 15 minutes we'd reached the formation. Elena's voice called out again, but this time it was coming from above us. We looked up. There, on a ledge about 30 feet up the rock face, I saw a figure. At first, I thought it was Elena. Same height, same build, same ranger uniform, but something was wrong with the way it moved, the way it held itself. Elena? Sarah called out. Are you injured? Can you climb down? The figure looked down at us, and that's when I saw its face. It wasn't Elena's face. It wasn't anyone's face. It was smooth, featureless, like a mannequin. But when it spoke, Elena's voice came out, perfect in every detail. Help me, it said. I can't get down. Patterson grabbed my arm. We need to leave now. But Sarah was already moving toward the rock face, reaching for her climbing gear. Hold on, Elena. I'm coming up. Sarah, stop, I shouted. But she either didn't hear me or didn't care. The thing on the ledge watched her climb with that blank, expressionless face. And as Sarah got closer, I saw other figures emerging from crevices in the rock. Dozens of them, all smooth-faced, all wearing different ranger uniforms from different eras. Some looked old, the fabric faded and torn. Others looked newer. One of them was wearing a uniform with a name tag I recognized, Pritchard. Sarah, get down, Patterson roared. But it was too late. Sarah reached the ledge, and the Elena thing reached out and touched her arm. Sarah froze completely still, like someone had pressed pause on her existence. Then, slowly, she turned to look down at us, and her face was smooth, blank, empty. Patterson and I ran. We crashed through the forest, branches whipping at our faces, neither of us daring to look back. Behind us, I heard voices calling out. My voice, Patterson's voice, Elena's voice, Sarah's voice, all calling for help, all begging us to come back. We didn't stop until we reached the helicopter. The pilot saw us coming and immediately started the engine. We threw ourselves inside, and within seconds, we were airborne. As we climbed, I looked down at the forest below, and I saw them. Hundreds of figures, maybe thousands, all standing among the trees, all looking up at us with their smooth, blank faces. Some wore ranger uniforms. Others wore hiking gear. Some wore clothes that looked decades old, centuries old maybe. And in the center of them all, standing at the granite formation, I saw Elena. The real Elena, I think. She was looking up at the helicopter, and even from this distance I could see the terror on her face. She was screaming something, but I couldn't hear over the sound of the rotors. Then the figures closed around her, and she was gone. Patterson radioed the Forward Operations Center and told them to evacuate immediately. By nightfall, every ranger, every search team member, every volunteer was out of the Absarokas. An emergency order was issued, closing the entire northern section of the park to public access until further notice. The official explanation was avalanche risk, unstable snowpack, dangerous conditions, all the usual bureaucratic language. But those of us who'd been there, we knew the truth. The mountains had taken Elena, just like they'd taken the Pritchards, just like they'd taken how many others over the years, over the decades, over the centuries. I submitted my resignation from the Forest Service the next day. Patterson retired a week later. The northern Absarokas remain closed to this day, though the Forest Service will tell you it's temporary, that they're just being cautious, that the danger will pass. But I know better. The mountains aren't dangerous because of avalanches or wildlife or weather. They're dangerous because they're alive in ways we can't understand. And they're hungry. I think about Elena every day. I think about Sarah. I think about all those figures standing in the forest wearing the bodies and voices of people who got too close, who stayed too long, who answered when they should have stayed silent. And I think about that night I walked away from the tent in the meadow, about the sound of the zipper opening, about the voice using my words to call me back. Patterson was right. Once the mountains call to you, they don't let go. Even now, living in Portland, working a desk job at a community college, I sometimes wake in the night and hear voices calling my name. They sound like friends, like family, like people I trust. But I know better. I know that up in the Absarokas something is wearing those voices, waiting for someone to answer, waiting for someone to come back. And I know, with absolute certainty, that I never will. Some places aren't meant for us. Some mountains aren't meant to be climbed. Some echoes aren't meant to be answered. The Absarokas taught me that. They taught Elena that too, though the lesson cost her everything. I just hope whoever reads this, whoever hears this story, learns from our mistakes. Because the mountains are always watching. The mountains are always waiting. And if you hear your voice calling from the darkness, if you hear someone you love crying for help in the deep wilderness, if you see figures standing in the tree line with faces you recognize, don't answer. Don't go to them. Don't even acknowledge they exist. Just turn around and walk away, and pray that they don't follow. My name is Jonah, and I spent 9 years working as a law enforcement ranger in the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness of Montana. When people hear law enforcement ranger, they usually picture someone writing tickets for illegal campfires or dealing with drunk campers. And sure, that was part of the job. But in the high country, especially in winter, law enforcement means something different. It means you're the first responder for everything. Medical emergencies, missing persons, wildlife incidents, illegal hunting. You're cop, paramedic, and search and rescue all rolled into one, operating in some of the most unforgiving terrain in the lower 48. I partnered with a ranger named Blaine for most of those 9 years. He was from Montana, born and raised in Red Lodge, and he knew the Absarokas like some people know their own backyards. He could navigate by stars, by wind patterns, by the way snow drifted against certain rock formations. He was the kind of guy you wanted next to you when things went sideways, and in that country, things went sideways more often than you'd think. The incident I'm about to describe happened in late October of 2011. The tourist season was over, most of the trails were closed, and the high country was getting its first serious snowfall of the season. Blaine and I were stationed at a small ranger cabin near Granite Peak, monitoring the area for illegal hunting activity. Elk season was in full swing at the lower elevations, and every year we'd get a few idiots who'd venture into closed wilderness areas trying to bag a trophy bull. On October 27th, we got a call from dispatch about a possible poaching situation. A helicopter pilot doing a routine wildlife survey had spotted what looked like a hunting camp set up in an alpine basin about 8 miles from our position. The basin was closed to all public access this time of year, which meant whoever was up there was breaking at least half a dozen regulations. Blaine and I geared up and headed out just after dawn. The temperature was hovering around 20 degrees, and fresh snow from the night before had left about 6 inches of powder on the ground. Perfect tracking conditions. If someone was up there, we'd find them. The hike took us about 4 hours. We moved through dense pine forest across a frozen creek and up a series of switchbacks that eventually opened onto the basin the pilot had described. It was a beautiful spot, even in the dead cold of late autumn. A small lake, frozen solid, surrounded by steep granite walls on 3 sides. The kind of place that would be swarming with backpackers in summer, but was completely isolated now. We spotted the camp immediately. A single tent, dark blue, set up about 50 yards from the lake. No smoke from a fire, no movement, no sound. We approached cautiously, calling out to announce ourselves. "Forest Service, anyone in camp?" Nothing. We called again, louder this time. Still nothing. When we reached the tent, Blaine knelt down and touched the fabric. "Still warm," he said. "Someone was here recently." I scanned the area around the camp. There were boot prints everywhere, size 10 or 11, men's boots with an aggressive tread pattern. But what caught my attention was a single set of prints leading away from camp, heading northwest toward a rocky outcropping about a quarter-mile away. "Looks like our hunter went for a walk," I said. Blaine stood up and pulled out his binoculars, scanning the direction of the tracks. "I don't see anyone, but there's a good vantage point up on those rocks. Could be glassing for elk." We decided to follow the tracks. Standard procedure was to make contact with anyone camping in closed areas and explain why they needed to leave. Most people were cooperative once you explained the regulations. The ones who weren't, well, that's why we carried badges and sidearms. The tracks were clear and easy to follow through the fresh snow. Single file, steady pace, heading directly toward the rocks. Whoever made them knew where they were going. We walked for maybe 10 minutes, keeping the tracks in sight the whole time. And then they stopped. Not at the rocks, not at a creek crossing, not at any logical endpoint. The tracks just stopped, mid-stride in the middle of an open snowfield. I stared at the final print for a long moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was a perfect impression, clear and deep, the heel and toe both visible, and then nothing. Just undisturbed snow extending for 30 feet in every direction. "What the hell?" I said. Blaine was already circling the area, looking for where the tracks picked up again, but there was nothing. He widened his search, moving in concentric circles, but the snow was pristine. No tracks, No disturbances, nothing. "This doesn't make sense," he said. "You can't just disappear mid-step." I pulled out my compass to get a bearing on the rock outcropping. The needle swung freely for a moment, then locked into position. But something was wrong. I tapped the compass, thinking maybe it was frozen, but the needle stayed fixed, pointing in a direction that definitely wasn't north. "Blaine, check your compass." He pulled his out and frowned. "That's weird. Mine's doing the same thing. Locked solid, but pointing the wrong direction." We both knew what a compass malfunction could mean. Magnetic anomalies weren't uncommon in mountain regions with high mineral content. Granite formations, iron deposits, even certain types of rock could throw off a compass. But having both compasses malfunction in the exact same way, at the exact same spot where a set of tracks mysteriously ended, that was new. "Let's mark this location and head back to camp," Blaine said. "Get our GPS coordinates, file a report. Something's not right here." I agreed. We used a small orange flag to mark where the last footprint was, then turned to head back toward the hunting camp. That's when we saw the second set of tracks. They were coming from the direction we'd just walked. Fresh tracks in the snow we'd already disturbed with our own footprints. Someone had followed us to this exact spot while we were circling the area looking for the continuation of the first set of tracks. "Did you hear anyone?" I asked Blaine, my hand instinctively moving to my sidearm. "No, nothing." We both spun around, scanning the terrain in every direction. The basin was silent. No wind, no animals, no sound at all except our own breathing. And still no sign of whoever had made those tracks. The new tracks were the same size and pattern as the first ones. Same person, same boots. They came right up to where we were standing, circled the area once, then headed back the way they'd come, toward the hunting camp. "This is somebody screwing with us," Blaine said, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. We followed the new tracks back to camp, moving faster now, both of us on high alert. It took us less than 5 minutes to cover the distance we'd walked earlier, and when we emerged from the trees and saw the campsite, we both stopped dead. The tent was gone. Not packed up, not collapsed. Gone. Like it had never been there. The only evidence that there'd ever been a camp was a slight depression in the snow where the tent had sat, and a circle of rocks that had probably been a fire ring. "I touched that tent," Blaine said, his voice tight. "It was warm. That was less than 15 minutes ago." I walked to where the tent had been and knelt down. The depression was still there, snow slightly compressed. I pressed my hand into it. Cold, not frozen solid cold, but not recently warm either. Like the tent had been gone for hours. The tracks we'd been following led directly to this spot, then stopped, just like before. No indication of where they'd come from or where they'd gone. Blaine pulled out his radio. "Dispatch, this is Ranger 5-2. We have a situation at grid reference." He stopped, looking at his GPS. "Jonah, what's our grid reference?" I checked my GPS. The screen was working. Satellite signal was strong, but the coordinates displayed were wrong. Way wrong. According to my GPS, we were 15 miles east of where we actually were. "My GPS is malfunctioning," I said. "Mine too. Same bad coordinates." We looked at each other. 2 compasses malfunctioning. 2 GPS units malfunctioning, all at the same location, all showing the same false information. "We need to get back to the cabin," I said. "Document everything. Get different equipment. Come back with backup." Blaine nodded. "Let's move." We started hiking back the way we'd come, using landmarks instead of navigation tools. The sun was starting to descend toward the western peaks, which meant we had maybe 3 hours of daylight left. The hike back should have taken 4 hours, but we could push it to 3 if we moved fast. An hour into the hike, I realized something was wrong. We should have crossed the frozen creek by now. I'd noted the time when we crossed it on the way in, and based on our current pace, we should have reached it 15 minutes ago. But there was no creek, just endless pine forest, all of it looking identical. "Blaine, you recognize this area?" He stopped and looked around. "No, this doesn't look right." We consulted our compasses again. Still malfunctioning, both needles locked in the same wrong direction. GPS still showing false coordinates. And now the sun was starting to play tricks too. It should have been dropping toward the western horizon, but it seemed to be in the wrong position, too far north. "We're lost," I said, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that was genuinely terrifying. Blaine was the best navigator I'd ever worked with, and I was no slouch myself. We both had years of experience in this wilderness. We knew these mountains. But somehow, between the mysterious campsite and now, we'd gotten completely turned around. "We need to stop and regroup," Blaine said. "Figure out where we went wrong." We found a small clearing and stopped to assess our situation. We had food, water, cold weather gear, emergency shelter. We weren't in immediate danger of exposure, but we were lost in terrain we should have known, with equipment that wasn't working, and night was coming fast. That's when I noticed the wind. It had been calm all day, barely a breeze. But now the wind was picking up, coming from the north. Strong enough to make the pine branches sway, strong enough to drift the snow into small swirls at our feet. And it didn't change direction, not once. For the next 20 minutes, as we tried to figure out our location, the wind blew steadily from the north, never varying in strength or direction by even a degree. "That's not natural," Blaine said quietly. "Wind doesn't blow perfectly steady like that, not in mountain terrain." He was right. Mountain weather was chaotic, unpredictable. Wind would gust and swirl, change direction constantly as it moved through valleys and over ridges. But this wind was constant, mechanical, like someone had pointed a giant fan at us and locked it in place. We decided to move perpendicular to the wind, figuring it would at least give us a consistent direction to travel. We marked our starting point with another orange flag and began walking east, or what we hoped was east. 30 minutes later, we found the orange flag we'd just placed. We'd walked in a circle. Blaine picked up the flag and looked at me. I could see fear in his eyes now, real fear. The kind that comes when you realize the rules you've lived by don't apply anymore. "This isn't possible," he said. We walked in a straight line. I was watching landmarks the entire time. We didn't curve, we didn't turn, we walked straight. I had no answer for him. He was right. I'd been watching our path too, and we'd walked straight. But somehow we'd ended up exactly where we started. The sun was touching the peaks now, maybe an hour of daylight left. We needed to make a decision. We could set up our emergency shelter and wait for morning. Hope that whatever was causing our equipment to malfunction would pass. Hope that daylight would make navigation easier. Or we could keep moving, keep trying to find our way out before full dark. "We stop," I decided. "Something's wrong with this place, and I don't want to be walking through it blind." We set up our shelter, a small 2-person bivvy tent designed for emergency situations. It wasn't comfortable, but it would keep us alive if the temperature dropped. We rationed our food and water, not knowing how long we'd be out here, and settled in to wait for morning. That's when the screaming started. It came from the south, distant but clear. A man's voice screaming for help, screaming in pain. Then it cut off abruptly, replaced by silence. Blaine and I looked at each other. "The hunter," I said. "Has to be. Or something wants us to think it's the hunter," Blaine replied. We sat in silence for a moment, listening. The wind continued its steady blow from the north. No other sounds, just wind and the occasional creak of branches. Then the screaming started again, but this time it was closer, much closer, just beyond the tree line, maybe 50 yards away. "Help me, please! Oh God, help me!" It sounded real. It sounded like someone in genuine distress. Every instinct I had said to grab our gear and go help. But something kept me frozen in place. "That's not real," Blaine whispered. "That's not a person." "How do you know?" "Because I recognize the voice. That's me screaming." I felt my blood go cold. He was right. The voice crying for help, the voice screaming in pain. It was Blaine's voice. Perfect in every detail, but definitely coming from somewhere outside our tent. The screaming continued for another 5 minutes, sometimes close, sometimes distant, always in Blaine's voice. Then it stopped, and a new voice started. My voice. "Blaine? Blaine, where are you? I'm hurt. I need help." I wanted to call back to tell whatever was out there to stop, but Blaine grabbed my arm and shook his head. We sat in silence while my voice called out, growing more desperate, more panicked. Eventually, it stopped. The night was completely silent now except for the wind. That steady, unchanging wind from the north. Neither of us slept. We sat in that tent, taking turns watching the entrance, watching for any sign of movement outside. The temperature dropped into the teens, and even with our cold weather gear, we were shivering. Around midnight, I saw movement. A figure, dark against the snow, walking past our tent maybe 20 feet away. It moved slowly, deliberately, and it was definitely human-shaped. But something about the way it moved wasn't right. The gait was off, the proportions slightly wrong. I nudged Blaine and pointed. He saw it too. The figure stopped and turned toward our tent. I couldn't see its face in the darkness, couldn't make out any details, but I felt it looking at us, felt its attention like weight. Then it continued walking, disappearing into the trees to the north. "What was that?" I whispered. "I don't know, but I don't think it was human." We waited for dawn, expecting every second that something would happen, that the figure would come back, that the voices would start again. But nothing happened. The wind blew steady from the north, the temperature dropped, and the night dragged on forever. When the first light of dawn finally started to brighten the eastern sky, we packed up our shelter and prepared to move. Our equipment was still malfunctioning, but we had a plan. We'd use the sun for navigation, head due east until we hit a recognizable landmark, then adjust from there. We walked for 2 hours through terrain that should have been familiar but looked completely foreign. Nothing was where it should be. Lakes we knew weren't there. Rock formations we'd never seen before jutted from the landscape. It was like we'd crossed into a different version of the wilderness, one that existed parallel to the one we knew, but wasn't quite the same. And then, suddenly, we broke through a line of trees and found ourselves on a trail. A real, maintained trail with marker posts and everything. I recognized it immediately. It was the North Fork Trail, about 3 miles from our cabin. We ran. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs shook, not stopping until we saw the cabin in the distance. When we burst through the door, our relief was so intense I almost collapsed. We spent the next hour documenting everything. Every detail, every anomaly, every impossible thing we'd experienced. When we radioed it in to our supervisor, a guy named Thompson, who'd been with the Forest Service for 20 years, he listened without interrupting. When we finished, there was a long silence on the radio. Then Thompson said, "Pack your gear. You're being reassigned, both of you. Effective immediately." "What? Why?" Blaine asked. "Because you're the third team this has happened to, and we still don't know what the hell is going on up there." Thompson met us at the ranger station in Red Lodge the next day. He looked tired, older than I remembered. He brought us into a conference room where another ranger was waiting, a woman named Sandra who worked in the adjacent sector to ours. "Tell them what you told me," Thompson said to Sandra. Sandra nodded and began her story. 2 weeks earlier, she'd been investigating reports of illegal hunting in her sector when she'd encountered a similar situation. Tracks that ended abruptly. Equipment malfunctions. A steadily blowing wind from one direction that never changed. She'd gotten out safely, but barely, and like us, she'd been reassigned immediately after. "How many teams?" I asked Thompson. "3 confirmed incidents in the past 2 months," he said. "Yours, Sandra's, and another team from the western sector, but there have been other reports. Hikers going missing, then turning up days later with no memory of where they've been. Wildlife behaving strangely. Electronics malfunctioning in specific areas." He pulled out a map and spread it across the table. All within this zone. He'd circled an area roughly 20 miles in diameter, centered on the northern section of the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. Our incident had occurred right in the middle of it. "What's causing it?" Blaine asked. Thompson shook his head. "We don't know. We've had geologists out there looking for magnetic anomalies. We've had the military check for classified installations or equipment that might be interfering with GPS signals. We've consulted with search and rescue experts, psychologists, even brought in a team from the USGS to look at seismic activity. Nothing explains what's happening." Sandra spoke up. "There's something else. The Forest Service has been going through historical records, incident reports going back decades. We're finding similar cases, all in the same general area. People getting lost in terrain they knew. Equipment failures, missing persons. It's been happening for a long time. We just never connected the dots." "How long?" I asked. "First documented case was in 1962. A ranger named Douglas went out on a routine patrol and didn't come back for 3 days. When he turned up, he had no explanation for where he'd been. Said he'd gotten lost, but couldn't describe how. They attributed it to a concussion from a fall, but his medical exam showed no injuries." Thompson pointed to a date on the map. 1978. A search and rescue team goes looking for missing hikers. The team gets disoriented, ends up circling the same area for 6 hours before finally finding their way out. 1989. A survey crew reports all their electronic equipment failing simultaneously in a specific valley. 1996. A group of experienced mountaineers gets lost on a trail they'd hiked dozens of times before. He looked at each of us in turn. "This has been going on for at least 50 years, maybe longer, but it's getting worse. The affected area is growing, and the incidents are becoming more frequent." "What about the voices?" Sandra asked quietly. "Did anyone else report hearing voices?" Thompson nodded slowly. "The ranger from 1962, Douglas. In his personal diary, which his family donated to the service after he passed away, he described hearing his wife's voice calling to him from the forest, but his wife was back home in Billings, 200 miles away." We sat in silence processing this information. Whatever was happening up there, it wasn't new. It was old, maybe older than any of us realized. "So what do we do?" Blaine asked. "We've closed the area to public access," Thompson said. "Officially, it's due to bear activity, but really, it's to keep people out until we figure out what's going on. As for you 3, you're being reassigned to different sectors, separate locations, different work schedules. We're documenting everything, building a database of experiences, trying to find patterns." "You think it's going to spread?" I asked. Thompson didn't answer, which was answer enough. Over the next few weeks, I was assigned to a sector near the southern edge of the wilderness, far from the affected zone. I threw myself into work, trying to forget what I'd experienced. trying to convince myself there was a rational explanation I just hadn't thought of yet. But then I started hearing from other rangers. Quiet conversations at supply depots, brief exchanges at training sessions. More incidents. Different locations, but all within the expanding circle Thompson had shown us. A ranger in the western sector reported his compass going haywire. Another in the east described following tracks that disappeared mid-stride. A search and rescue team spent 8 hours lost in an area they'd operated in for years. And the voices. Everyone reported the voices. Sometimes it was their own voice. Sometimes it was a loved one. Sometimes it was someone they barely knew. But always familiar enough to be tempting. Always desperate enough to demand a response. The Forest Service's response was to close more areas, cite more regulations, create more bureaucratic distance between the public and the affected zones. But they couldn't stop their own people from going in there. Rangers still had to patrol, maintain trails, monitor wildlife. And every time someone went into those zones, there was a chance they wouldn't come out the same. In December, I got a call from Sandra. She'd been reassigned to a sector near mine, and she wanted to meet for coffee in Red Lodge. We met at a small diner on the edge of town. Sandra looked exhausted, like she hadn't been sleeping well. I probably looked the same. "I think I know what's happening," she said after we'd ordered. I leaned forward. "What?" "I think the wilderness is rejecting us. I know that sounds insane, but hear me out. For thousands of years, this area was relatively untouched. Native peoples passed through, but they didn't establish permanent settlements. There are legends, stories passed down, about certain areas being taboo, places where people shouldn't go. You think this is some kind of Native American curse?" I asked skeptically. "No, not a curse, something else. Something older. Think about it, Jonah. The symptoms are always the same. Spatial disorientation, equipment failure, the sensation of being watched, the voices. It's like the land itself is pushing back against human intrusion." "That's not scientific," I said. "Land doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't have intent. Then how do you explain what we experienced? How do you explain 50 years of incidents, all in the same area, all with the same characteristics?" I didn't have an answer. Sandra pulled out a notebook filled with handwritten notes. "I've been researching, not just Forest Service records, but historical accounts, anthropological studies, geological surveys. This area has always been strange. The Crow people have stories about the place where sounds walk. The Shoshone talk about mountains that move in the night. Early European explorers described getting lost in valleys that seemed to change shape. So, what are you saying? That the wilderness is alive? I'm saying something is happening that we don't understand. And maybe we're not supposed to understand it. Maybe some places exist outside the boundaries of what we can measure and map. Maybe the Absarokas are one of those places." I wanted to dismiss her theory as superstition, but I couldn't. I'd been there. I'd seen the tracks end mid-stride. I'd felt the mechanical precision of that unchanging wind. I'd heard my own voice calling from the darkness. "What do we do about it?" I asked. Sandra closed her notebook. "I don't think there's anything we can do, except stay out. Respect the boundaries. Acknowledge that some places aren't meant for us." We finished our coffee in silence, both of us knowing that the conversation we'd just had would sound crazy to anyone who hadn't experienced what we had. But it didn't matter. We knew the truth. The wilderness was changing. Or maybe it had always been this way, and we were only just now paying enough attention to notice. I requested a transfer out of Montana in January. Thompson approved it without question. I ended up in Olympic National Park in Washington, about as far from the Absarokas as I could get while still being a ranger. But I kept in touch with Blaine and Sandra. We'd email occasionally, sharing updates, watching the situation develop from a distance. In March, Blaine emailed me with disturbing news. The affected zone had expanded again, now covering nearly 40 square miles. More rangers were reporting incidents. More areas were being closed, and the voices were getting more sophisticated, more convincing. One ranger described being called back to his truck by what he swore was his supervisor's voice, giving specific instructions about an emergency situation. He'd followed the voice for 2 hours before realizing he was walking in circles. Another reported seeing her own truck parked on a trail where it shouldn't have been, keys in the ignition, engine running. When she approached, it vanished. The incidents were escalating, becoming more aggressive, more targeted. In May, Sandra stopped responding to emails. I tried calling her, but her number was disconnected. I reached out to Thompson, asking if he knew where she'd been reassigned. "Sandra's no longer with the service," Thompson said, and his tone told me not to ask more questions. But I did anyway. "What happened?" A long pause, then she went back. "Back where?" "Into the zone. Said she needed to understand it, needed to see it through." "We found her truck at a trailhead 3 days later. We haven't found her." I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. "You're still looking, right?" We conducted a standard search. Grid pattern, dogs, helicopter. Found nothing. Case is still technically open, but he trailed off. "But you don't think you'll find her?" "I think she found what she was looking for," Thompson said quietly. Whatever that was. After that conversation, I stopped following the situation. Stopped checking emails, stopped asking questions. I threw myself into my work at Olympic, trying to convince myself that the Absarokas and whatever was happening there had nothing to do with me anymore. But you can't really leave something like that behind. It follows you. In quiet moments, when you're alone in the woods, you find yourself listening for voices that shouldn't be there. You check your compass more often than you need to. You watch for tracks that end abruptly. And sometimes, late at night, you wonder about the people who didn't make it out. The ones who followed the voices, who trusted their equipment, who thought they knew the wilderness better than it knew them. You wonder what they found at the end of those tracks. And you wonder if maybe, just maybe, they're still out there somewhere, walking in circles through a forest that never ends, listening to voices that wear familiar faces, trying to find their way home through a wilderness that won't let them leave. I worked at Olympic for 2 years without incident. The park was beautiful, the work was fulfilling, and slowly I began to convince myself that what happened in the Absarokas had been an isolated anomaly, a strange confluence of factors that had created a temporary situation, nothing more. Then, in August of 2013, I got a call from Blaine. "Jonah, you need to hear this," he said. His voice was tight, strained. "They found something." "Found what?" "A journal, in one of the zones. It belonged to a ranger named Douglas, the one from 1962 that Thompson told us about." I felt my stomach drop. "I thought Douglas came back?" "He did. This journal was from a second trip, one he made off the books, 3 years after his first disappearance. He went back into the zone deliberately, and this time he didn't come out." "Where did they find it?" "That's the thing. They found it at the exact spot where your tracks ended that day. The exact spot where we marked with the flag." I sat down, processing this information. "What does the journal say?" "I'll send you scans. But Jonah, there's something else. The journal isn't written in normal sequence. The entries are dated, but they don't follow a logical timeline. He's got entries from the same day with hours between them, but he describes days or weeks passing. And the last entry..." Blaine paused. "The last entry is dated 10 years after he went missing." "That's impossible. He'd have been 70 years old. There's no way he survived 10 years in the wilderness. I'm just telling you what the journal says. Read it yourself. Blaine emailed me the scans that night. I printed them out and spread them across my kitchen table, trying to organize them in some kind of logical order. But Blaine was right. They didn't make sense chronologically. The first entry was dated July 15th, 1965. I've come back. Sarah thinks I'm on a fishing trip, but I had to return to the place where I got lost. I need to understand what happened. The Forest Service won't investigate properly. They've already decided it was just a case of disorientation and poor judgment. But I know better. I know what I saw, what I heard. The land changed around me. Time moved differently, and I need to know why. The next entry was from the same day, but the timestamp indicated it was written 4 hours later. I've been walking for what feels like 3 days, but my watch says 4 hours. The sun is in the wrong position. My compass is spinning. I'm starting to think this was a mistake, but I'm also starting to understand something. The wilderness here isn't bound by the same rules we are. It exists in multiple states simultaneously. Past and present aren't separate. They're layered on top of each other. Then an entry from July 20th, 5 days later. Haven't eaten in 2 days. Or maybe I ate yesterday, I can't remember. Time keeps slipping. I see things that haven't happened yet, or maybe things that happened long ago. Last night, I saw a camp with people in modern clothing using equipment that doesn't exist yet. They couldn't see me. I tried calling to them, but they walked right past me like I wasn't there. The entries continued, becoming more disjointed, more abstract. August 1965. The voices are teaching me. They're not malevolent, they're just confused. They're fragments of people who got lost here, pieces of consciousness trapped in the fold. That's what I'm calling it now, the fold, where the wilderness bends back on itself. September 1965. Met another ranger today. He said his name was Jonah, said he was from the future, said he'd been lost here with his partner. I tried to warn him, but he couldn't hear me, or maybe I couldn't speak loud enough. The fold doesn't allow direct communication. We can only leave traces. I stopped reading and looked at the date, September 1965. 4 years before I was born. This entry was describing me, decades before I'd ever set foot in the Absarokas. I continued reading, my hands shaking. October 1965. Saw Sarah today. She was standing at the edge of the fold, calling my name. But she was young, the age she was when we got married. That was 15 years ago. I'm seeing the past, or a version of the past. I tried to go to her, but the fold wouldn't let me. I'm trapped in this moment, the specific point in time and space where the wilderness has decided I belong. December 1965. Time is meaningless here. I've been here for months, or maybe just days. I see the same sunrise over and over. The same deer walking through the same clearing. It's a loop, but it's not exact. Small things change. A tree is in a different position. Snow that wasn't there before. The wilderness is trying to stabilize, to find an equilibrium, but something keeps disrupting it. Then a gap. The next entry was dated 1967. 2 years gone, or maybe no time at all. I found where the fold originates. There's a point, a specific location, where something happened. Something that fractured the normal flow of space and time. I don't know if it was natural or man-made, but it's still active. It's like a wound in reality that won't heal. I think people who get close to this wound, they become part of it. Their consciousness gets absorbed, and then the fold uses them. It recreates their voices, their appearances, trying to lure others in. Not out of malice, but because it doesn't understand what it's doing. It's just trying to heal itself, and it thinks absorbing more consciousness will help. The entries became more sparse after that. Years would pass between them. But the handwriting remained consistent, never wavering, never showing signs of age or deterioration. 1971, still here, still watching. The fold is growing. I can see it expanding, reaching further with each cycle. More people are getting caught. More voices are being added to the chorus. 1975, saw Jonah again. This time he was with a woman named Sandra. They were investigating something. I tried to leave a warning, tried to mark the path, but the fold absorbed my markers. Everything I do gets erased in the next cycle. That's when I understood. The tracks that ended abruptly. The equipment failures. The voices. They weren't random phenomena. They were symptoms of something trying to repair itself. A tear in the fabric of reality that had somehow trapped consciousness inside it. Douglas's final entry was dated 1975, but it read like it was written by someone who'd spent centuries in isolation. I don't know if this journal will ever be found. I don't know if time outside the fold still moves the way it's supposed to. But if someone reads this, understand. The wilderness here is broken. Something happened long before any of us were born that created a space where normal rules don't apply. And once you enter that space, you become part of it. Your consciousness gets woven into the pattern, and the fold uses you to perpetuate itself. I've seen hundreds of people pass through over what I perceive as years. Most make it out. Some don't. The ones who don't, they're still here, trapped in their own loops, seeing their own versions of events. We're all separate, but occupying the same space. Ghosts to each other. If you're reading this, you're probably in danger of getting caught. My advice? Don't follow voices. Don't trust your equipment when it starts malfunctioning. And if you find a place where tracks end abruptly, where the wind blows from only one direction, where your compass needle locks in place, run. Run and don't look back, because the fold is patient. It will wait. It will learn your voice, your face, your fears, and one day, when you least expect it, it will call you back. And if you answer, you'll end up like me, trapped forever. The journal ended there. The last page showed signs of water damage, like it had been left outside for years, but the paper itself wasn't degraded, wasn't yellowed by age. It looked like it had been written recently, despite the dates going back decades. I called Blaine immediately. "You read it?" he asked. "Yeah. Christ, Blaine, what is this?" The Forest Service has classified it. They're not releasing it publicly. Too many questions it can't answer. But Thompson wanted us to know, wanted us to understand what we encountered. Does Thompson think Douglas is still out there? Thompson thinks the wilderness has always been doing this. Trapping people, absorbing consciousness, creating these loops. He thinks it goes back hundreds of years, maybe thousands. He thinks there are hundreds of people trapped in that fold. All of them experiencing their own version of time, all of them unable to escape. I thought about the figure we'd seen that night. The one that moved wrong, that looked human but wasn't quite right. I thought about my own voice calling from the darkness, about Blaine's voice screaming for help. "We heard ourselves," I said quietly. "That night in the tent, we heard our own voices calling from outside. I know. Blaine, I think we're already part of it. I think some version of us is still there, trapped in the fold, calling out to anyone who gets close." He was quiet for a long moment. Thompson said the same thing. Said anyone who's been in the affected zone and made it out, they've left a piece of themselves behind. An echo. And that echo stays there, repeating forever. We ended the call without saying goodbye. What was there to say? We'd survived, but we'd also lost something in those woods. a part of ourselves that would never come back. I tried to go on with my life. I stayed at Olympic, did my job, even started dating a woman who worked as a marine biologist at the park. I told her I used to work in Montana but left for better opportunities. I never mentioned the Absarokas, never mentioned the fold, but sometimes, late at night, I'd wake up and hear my own voice calling from outside, distant, desperate, begging for help. I'd check the windows, check the doors, but there was never anyone there, just the echo of something I'd left behind. In 2015, Thompson retired. He sent a group email to everyone who'd been involved in the incidents. Just a brief note saying he was done with the Forest Service and moving to Arizona. But he attached one final document to the email. It was a map. The affected zone in the Absarokas had expanded to over 60 square miles. The entire northern section of the wilderness was now considered high risk. The Forest Service had stopped sending rangers in except for emergency situations. Several trails had been permanently closed. The official reason was environmental protection, but we all knew the truth. They'd given up trying to understand it. They were just containing it now, hoping it wouldn't spread further. Thompson's email ended with a simple message. Don't go back. Not ever. It wants you to come back. All of you. I hear my own voice sometimes, calling from places I've never been. It's using what it learned from us, and it's getting better at it. Stay away. Stay safe. And if you ever hear someone calling your name in the wilderness, don't answer. Some places aren't meant for us. The Absarokas taught me that. I hope you learned the same lesson. I deleted the email, but I kept the map, printed it out and put it in a drawer where I'd see it sometimes, a reminder of what I'd survived. Blaine called me one last time in early 2016. He'd left the Forest Service too, was working as a surveyor for a mining company in Wyoming. You ever think about going back? He asked. No, never. You? Every day, he admitted. I dream about it. That basin where we found the camp, the place where the tracks ended. In my dreams, I walk to that spot and I keep going. I take that final step, the one that would make the tracks continue, and I see what's on the other side. Don't, I said. Blaine, promise me you won't go back. I promise, but Jonah, I think part of me is already there. I think I left something in that fold and it's calling to me, trying to pull the rest of me back to make me whole again. Fight it. You made it out. Don't throw that away. I know. I just wanted you to know, in case something happens, in case I change my mind. We said goodbye, and that was the last time I spoke to him. 3 months later, I got an email from a woman who identified herself as Blaine's sister. She said Blaine had gone missing during a camping trip in Montana. Search and rescue had found his truck at a trailhead near the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness. They'd found his camp, his gear, everything, but no sign of Blaine. The last entry in his personal journal, which she'd attached to the email, was dated the day he disappeared. I can hear myself calling from inside the fold. That version of me that got left behind is calling the rest of me home. I know I shouldn't go, I know what will happen, but I can't fight it anymore. I need to see what's there. I need to understand what Douglas understood. If anyone finds this, I'm sorry, I thought I was stronger than this, but the wilderness always wins. It's patient, it waits, and eventually we all answer when it calls. I never responded to his sister's email. What could I say? That her brother had walked into a fold in reality, a place where time and space didn't work right, where consciousness got trapped and echoed forever. She'd think I was insane, but I knew the truth. Blaine had gone back, and now some version of him was walking those woods, calling out to anyone who got close, trying to pull them in. Just like Douglas, just like Sandra, just like all the others who'd gotten caught in the fold and couldn't get out. I left Olympic shortly after that. Couldn't stay in the wilderness anymore. The trees looked wrong. The mountains felt too close. I took a job as a safety inspector for the Park Service, doing office work, reviewing procedures, anything that kept me away from the backcountry. But before I made that final transition to desk work, something else happened. Something I need to tell you about because it changed everything I thought I understood about the fold. It was late 2016, about 6 months after Blaine disappeared. I was still at Olympic, still working as a ranger, but counting down the days until my transfer went through. I was doing a routine patrol near the Hoh River Trail when I met an old man sitting on a bench at one of the scenic overlooks. He was probably in his 80s, wearing clothes that looked decades out of date. A flannel shirt, work pants, boots that had been resoled so many times they were more stitching than leather. He was staring out at the forest with an expression I recognized immediately, the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen something they couldn't explain. I almost walked past him, but something made me stop. "Beautiful day," I said, more out of habit than anything else. He turned to look at me, and his eyes were sharp, intelligent, completely lucid. "You're a ranger," he said. Not a question. "That's right. Everything okay?" "You ever worked in Montana?" he asked. "The Absarokas?" I felt my blood run cold. "Who are you?" "My name is Douglas," he said, "and I think you and I need to have a conversation." I sat down next to him, my mind reeling. It couldn't be. Douglas had disappeared in 1965. He'd have been well over 90 by now. And even if he'd somehow survived, how would he have known I worked in the Absarokas? "I know what you're thinking," Douglas said. "You read my journal. Thompson sent you the scans, didn't he?" "How do you know about that?" "Because I've been watching. Not physically, you understand. But the fold, it creates connections between people who've been touched by it. I've been watching you and Blaine and Sandra and all the others. Watching from inside the fold, even though I'm also here, sitting on this bench, talking to you. That's impossible, is it?" He smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You heard your own voice calling from outside your tent? You found my journal at the exact spot where your tracks ended. You think those are coincidences?" I didn't know what to say. Douglas leaned back against the bench. "I got out, Jonah. In 1975, after 10 years in the fold, I found a way out. But it cost me. I had to leave most of myself behind. The version of me that's still in the fold, that's the real me, the conscious, aware me. This version, the one sitting here talking to you, I'm just an echo, a fragment that managed to cross back over. I don't understand. The fold doesn't trap your body, Jonah. It traps your consciousness, your awareness, the you that thinks and feels and experiences time. When you cross into the fold, your consciousness gets fractured. Most of it stays there, experiencing the loop over and over. But small fragments can escape, can attach themselves to the physical body that made it out. That's what I am, a fragment. Just enough to operate this body, to live a semblance of a normal life, but not enough to feel truly alive." He looked at me with those sharp eyes. "And that's what you are too. You think you escaped the fold intact, but you didn't. Most of you is still there, walking in circles, trying to understand what happened. The you sitting here talking to me, you're just the fragment that managed to hold on to the body." "No," I said, but even as I said it, I knew he was right. I'd felt it for years, that sensation of being incomplete, of watching my own life from a distance. I'd attributed it to trauma, to PTSD, to the stress of what I'd experienced. But it was more than that. I was the echo. The real me was still in the Absarokas. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Because you need to understand what Blaine did. When he went back, he wasn't trying to get lost. He was trying to reunite with himself, to gather all the fragments back together and become whole again. And he succeeded. But he disappeared. He's gone. From this world, yes. But in the fold, he's complete now. All his fragments merged back together. He exists fully, consciously in that space outside normal time. And Jonah, he's happy. As happy as anyone can be who's trapped in an eternal moment. Because at least he's whole. I thought about that for a long time. Is that why people go back? Why they answer when they hear themselves calling? Some do. Others go back because they can't live as fragments anymore. The incompleteness. It eats at you. You feel it, don't you? That hollow sensation, like you're not entirely present in your own life. I nodded slowly. That's what drives people back to the fold. Not the voices, not the mystery. The need to be whole again. The need to gather all the scattered pieces of yourself and exist completely, even if it means existing outside normal reality. Douglas stood up, moving slowly, carefully, like someone much older than he appeared. I came here to give you a choice, Jonah. You can keep living as a fragment. Keep pretending you're whole, keep working your desk job and building a life around the hollow space where most of you used to be. A lot of people do that. They survive. They get by. Or you can go back. Deliberately, like I did. Like Blaine did. You can walk into the fold knowing what you're doing, and you can reunite with the rest of yourself. You'll never leave. You'll exist in that moment forever. But you'll be complete. Fully conscious. Fully alive, even if alive means something different there. What did you choose? I asked. He smiled sadly. I chose to come back. To live as a fragment. I had a wife, children, a life I didn't want to abandon. So I left most of myself behind and came back with just enough to function. And I've regretted it every day since. Why? Because being a fragment means you're never fully present for anything. You watch your children grow up, but you don't quite feel the joy you should. You hold your wife, but the connection isn't complete. You live your life at arm's length from your own experiences. It's a kind of death, Jonah. A slow, gray death that lasts decades. He started walking away, then stopped and turned back. I'm telling you this because you're young. You have time to make a different choice than I did. Think about what I said. Think about whether you want to spend the next 50 years as a fragment, or whether you want to be whole, even if whole means something impossible. Wait, I called after him. How do I find you if I have questions? He smiled. You can't. This is the only time you'll see me. I used the last of my energy to manifest here to have this conversation. After this, I fade. The fragment dissolves and the body stops functioning. By tomorrow, Douglas will be officially dead for the second time. Then why waste it on me? Because someone needed to know the truth. Someone needed to understand what the fold really is, what it really does. And maybe you'll make a better choice than I did. Maybe you'll have the courage I didn't. He walked away, disappearing into the forest. I never saw him again. 3 days later, I read an obituary for a man named Douglas, who'd been found dead on a trail in Olympic National Park. Natural causes, the article said. He was 87. But I knew better. That conversation changed everything for me. I started paying attention to the hollow feeling, the sense of watching my life from a distance, and I realized Douglas was right. I wasn't whole. Most of me was still in the Absarokas, trapped in that moment when I'd stood at the place where the tracks ended. I tried to live with it. I took the desk job, moved to Seattle, started building a normal life. I dated, made friends, went through all the motions of being a regular person, but it was exactly like Douglas had described. Everything happened at arm's length. Joy was muted. Sadness was distant. Even fear, which should have been sharp and immediate, felt like something happening to someone else. I was a ghost haunting my own life. The years passed, 2017, 2018, 2019. I kept working, kept going through the motions. The voice still called to me sometimes, but I'd gotten better at ignoring it. Or maybe I'd just gotten used to it, the way you get used to a ringing in your ears that never quite goes away. Then, in early 2020, I got an email from Thompson. He'd been retired for 5 years, but he still kept track of developments in the Absarokas. The email contained a single attachment, a satellite image of the affected zone. The fold had grown. What had been 60 square miles was now over 100, and it was accelerating. Thompson included a note. It's not stopping. Every year it grows faster. By 2030, at current rates, it'll cover the entire wilderness area. By 2050, it could extend into populated regions. We don't know how to stop it. We don't even know if it can be stopped. I'm sending this to everyone who's been affected, everyone who's left a fragment behind, because I think the fold is growing by absorbing those fragments, pulling them back in. And when it has enough of them, enough consciousness to work with, it might be able to expand even faster. I don't know what to do about it, but I thought you should know. I stared at that satellite image for hours. All those square miles of wilderness. All that space where reality didn't work right, where time folded back on itself, where people got trapped in moments that never ended. And I thought about Douglas's words. About being whole versus being a fragment. About the courage to make a choice. I thought about Blaine, who'd chosen to go back, who'd decided that being complete in the fold was better than being incomplete in the real world. And I thought about Sandra, who'd gone back to understand, who'd walked into the fold deliberately, knowing she might never leave because she needed to know the truth. I made my decision that night. I quit my job with the Park Service, sold my apartment, said goodbye to the few friends I'd made in Seattle. I told them I was moving abroad, starting fresh somewhere new. They threw me a small goodbye party, and I smiled and thanked them and felt absolutely nothing, because I wasn't going abroad. I was going home, to the Absarokas, to the fold, to the place where most of me had been waiting for 9 years. I drove to Montana in late March of 2020, just as the world was starting to shut down for the pandemic. The timing was perfect. No one was paying attention to one man driving into the mountains. No one was monitoring the closed wilderness areas. I parked at the same trailhead where Blaine had left his truck. I packed light, just enough supplies to reach the affected zone. I didn't need much. I wasn't planning on coming back. The hike took 2 days. The wilderness was beautiful, pristine, untouched by the chaos happening in the world below. Snow still clung to the high peaks. The air was crisp and clean, and with every step I took, the hollow feeling lessened. I was getting closer to the rest of myself, and I could feel it. On the evening of the second day, I reached the basin where it had all started. The place where we'd found the mysterious camp, where the tracks had ended, where my compass had stopped working. I set up my tent and waited for dark. As the sun set behind the western peaks, I felt it, the change. The air became thicker, heavier. The wind started blowing from the north, steady and unchanging. And in the distance I heard voices. My voice, Blaine's voice, Sandra's voice, Douglas's voice. All of us calling, welcoming, inviting the fragment to come home. I stood up and walked towards the sound. I didn't need a compass or GPS. I could feel the pull now, like a tide drawing me toward the fold. I walked past the orange flag that still marked the spot where the tracks had ended 9 years ago. And I kept walking. That final step, the one that would make the tracks continue, felt like stepping through a membrane. There was resistance, then release, and suddenly I was through. The world shifted. I could see the forest, but I could also see through it, into other times, other moments. I saw Blaine standing next to me, whole and complete, smiling. I saw Sandra examining something in her hand, a look of wonder on her face. I saw Douglas, not the old fragment I'd met, but the full version, the one who'd been trapped here since 1965, and he nodded at me with understanding, and I saw myself. The version of me that had been trapped here, walking in circles, searching for the fragment that had escaped. When our eyes met, I felt something shift. A reconnection, a completion. The two versions of me walked toward each other, and when we touched, we merged. And suddenly, I was whole. I could feel everything. All the experiences I'd been unable to fully process for 9 years came flooding back with full intensity. The fear, the wonder, the confusion, the awe. It was overwhelming and perfect and terrible and beautiful all at once. I existed in all moments simultaneously now. I could see the day we'd first entered the basin, could see Blaine and myself searching for the mysterious hunter. I could see the night we'd heard the voices, could see us huddled in the tent, terrified. I could see every moment that had led to this one, all happening at once, layered on top of each other. And I understood what the fold really was. It wasn't a trap, it wasn't malevolent, it was a refuge, a place where consciousness that had been fragmented could become whole again, where people who'd been shattered by the chaos of linear time could exist in all moments at once, experiencing everything simultaneously, fully present in every second of their existence. It was impossible and beautiful, and I never wanted to leave. I live in Seattle now. Urban environment, lots of people, no wilderness for miles. No, wait, that's not right. I live in the fold now, in the space between moments, in the place where time bends back on itself. I exist in all versions of the Absarokas simultaneously. The summer and the winter, the past and the present, the moment I arrived and the moment I'll never leave. And I'm whole. Blaine is here. Sandra is here. Douglas is here. Hundreds of others are here, all of us existing in our own loops, our own eternal moments, but aware of each other in ways we never were in linear time. Sometimes I see new people arriving. I see them take that final step, see their tracks end where tracks always end, see them reunite with the fragments of themselves they left behind. And I understand now why they come, not because they're lost, but because they want to be found. The fold is growing, yes. Thompson was right about that. But it's not malevolent, it's not consuming. It's offering wholeness to a world of fragments, offering completion to people who've been scattered by the violence of linear existence. And yes, maybe that's terrifying. Maybe the idea of a space where consciousness can escape the tyranny of sequential time is fundamentally incompatible with human civilization as we know it. But I'm here to tell you, it's also beautiful. The tracks end where they end for a reason. That's where the person stopped being entirely human. That's where they stepped across the threshold and became something more. And everything after that point? That's not a place of terror. That's where the wilderness keeps its promises. Where footprints go when they stop walking forward and start walking everywhere at once. Where voices go when they echo across all possible moments. Where people go when they finally answer the call to be whole. I'll never leave now, because leaving would mean fragmenting again. It would mean going back to that gray, muted existence where nothing feels fully real. Some paths aren't meant to be followed by fragments. Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved by incomplete beings. And some places, some terrible, beautiful, impossible places, aren't meant for the living at all. They're meant for the whole. And I am finally, perfectly, impossibly whole. My name is Rowan, and I spent 6 years working as a backcountry ranger in the Absaroka Range, primarily in the northwestern section that borders Yellowstone National Park. I partnered with another ranger named Tess for most of that time. She was former military, had done 2 tours in Afghanistan as a combat medic, and she approached wilderness work with the same methodical precision she'd learned in the service. Maps, routes, waypoints, coordinates. Tess documented everything twice, cross-referenced everything 3 times, and trusted her instruments the way some people trust religion, which made what happened to us in the fall of 2015 all the more disturbing. We'd been assigned to conduct a week-long survey of trail conditions in a remote sector about 20 miles north of the park boundary. The area saw maybe a dozen hikers per year, and most of our work involved documenting erosion, checking for downed trees, and making sure the trail markers were still visible. It was routine work, the kind of assignment that let you spend days in the wilderness without much stress. We started our hike on a Tuesday morning in late September. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, temperature in the mid-50s, and that crisp autumn air that makes you feel alive just breathing it. We planned to cover about 4 miles per day, camping at designated sites along the trail, completing our survey and hiking back out by Sunday. Tess had our route meticulously planned. She'd marked every waypoint on her GPS, had printed topographic maps with the route highlighted in yellow, and had even created a backup set of coordinates in case her primary GPS failed. She carried a compass, a backup compass, and a phone app that could navigate by stars. I used to tease her about being over-prepared, but that was just Tess. In her world, redundancy meant survival. The first 2 days went exactly according to plan. We hiked, we documented, we set up camp at the designated sites. On Tuesday night, we camped near a creek called Silver Run. On Wednesday night, we camped at a ridge overlook with a view of 3 valleys. Everything was normal. Everything was going smoothly. Thursday morning, that's when things started to feel wrong. We woke up at dawn, packed our gear, and started hiking. Tess checked her GPS, confirmed our position, and pointed to the trail ahead. 4.2 miles to tonight's camp, she said. Should be there by early afternoon. I nodded and followed her up the trail. The morning was cold, probably in the low 40s, and frost clung to the pine needles. Our breath misted in the air as we climbed a series of switchbacks that would take us over a saddle between 2 peaks. But when we reached the top of the saddle, something was off. According to our map, we should have seen a valley stretching north, with a small alpine lake visible about a mile away. Instead, we were looking at a different valley entirely. This one ran east-west, and there was no lake, just a dense forest of lodgepole pine. Did we take a wrong turn? I asked. Tess was already checking her GPS. She frowned, tapped the screen, then checked her paper map. No, GPS says we're exactly where we should be. We're at waypoint 7, the saddle. But this isn't the right valley? Could the map be wrong? No. I've used this map before, this route. I know what's supposed to be here. She pulled out her compass, checked our bearing, then looked at the GPS again. This doesn't make sense. The compass and GPS both agree on our position, but what we're seeing doesn't match. I looked around, trying to find some landmark I recognized from the map. But everything looked wrong. The peaks were the wrong shape. The valley was oriented in the wrong direction. It was like we'd crossed the saddle and ended up in completely different terrain. Maybe we're on a different saddle, I suggested. Maybe we took a fork in the trail we didn't notice. Tess shook her head. There are no forks. The trail is linear. We couldn't have gotten off the route without knowing it. We stood there for a long moment, both of us trying to reconcile what our instruments were telling us with what our eyes were seeing. Finally, Tess made a decision. We continue north. That's what the GPS says. If the terrain doesn't match the map, we trust the instruments and adjust our expectations. It made sense. GPS doesn't lie. Compasses don't lie. If both were telling us we were on the right route, then we were on the right route, even if it looked wrong. We started down into the valley that shouldn't have been there. The descent took about an hour. The trail was clear and well maintained, which should have been reassuring, but somehow it wasn't. Everything felt slightly off. The spacing between trees seemed wrong. The angle of the sun seemed wrong. Even the sound of our footsteps on the trail seemed wrong, like the acoustics of the forest had changed. Tess kept checking her GPS every few minutes. We're still en route, she'd say, but I could hear the uncertainty in her voice. Around noon, we stopped for lunch at a clearing. Tess spread out her paper map and placed her GPS next to it, comparing the two. I watched as she traced our route with her finger, double-checking every waypoint. Look at this, she said, pointing to the map. We're here, at this clearing. According to the elevation profile, we should be at 7,200 feet. The GPS says we're at 7,200 feet, so we're in the right place. But this clearing isn't on the map. There's no clearing marked at this location. And the valley we're in, the one running east-west, it's not on the map either. The map shows a north-south valley. I looked at the map, then at the GPS, then at the clearing around us. She was right. Everything matched except for the one thing that mattered most, the actual terrain we were standing in. Could there be an error in the map? I asked. Maybe it was surveyed wrong? This is a USGS topographic map. They don't make errors like this. And even if they did, my GPS is pulling data from satellites. It's not using the map data, it's using real-time positioning. Both can't be wrong in the exact same way. We finished our lunch in silence, both of us trying to figure out what was happening. Finally, Tess packed up her gear and checked her GPS one more time. 2.3 miles to tonight's camp, she said. We keep moving north. The afternoon hike was uncomfortable. Not physically. The trail was good, the weather was fine, but psychologically, every landmark we passed seemed wrong. Trees were in places they shouldn't be. Rock formations didn't match the map. Even the wildlife seemed off. We saw a deer at one point, and it watched us with an intensity that felt almost human, like it knew we didn't belong there. Around 4 in the afternoon, Tess's GPS started acting strangely. The position marker would jump around the screen, showing us in different locations even though we were standing still. She reset it, and it seemed to stabilize, but the position it showed was impossible. According to the GPS, we were standing in the middle of a lake. "That's not right," Tess said, tapping the screen. "There's no lake here." I looked around. She was right. We were standing on a trail in a forest. No lake anywhere in sight. She pulled out her paper map and checked it. According to the map, there was a lake about 3 miles east of our current position. But according to the GPS, the lake was here, where we were standing. "The GPS is malfunctioning," I said. "Maybe, but the coordinates haven't changed. It still thinks we're at the same elevation, the same latitude and longitude. It's just overlaying those coordinates on the wrong terrain." We stood there for a few minutes, watching the GPS as it continued to insist we were standing in water. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it corrected itself. The position marker jumped back to the trail, and everything looked normal again. "Let's just get to camp," Tess said quietly. We reached our planned campsite just as the sun was starting to set, and that's when we discovered the real problem. The campsite was exactly where the GPS said it should be. The coordinates matched perfectly, but the campsite itself was wrong. According to our plan, we were supposed to camp at a flat area near a stream, with a view of a granite cliff faced to the west. Instead, we'd arrived at a different site entirely, a small clearing surrounded by dense pine, no stream, no cliff face, nothing that matched our expectations. "This isn't right," Tess said, and for the first time since I'd known her, I heard real fear in her voice. I pulled out my own compass and took a bearing. North was north, east was east. The directions were correct, but the terrain was wrong. "We should mark our route," I said. "Use flagging tape, mark the trail we came in on. That way we know how to get back." Tess nodded, and we spent the next 30 minutes placing bright orange flagging tape on trees along the trail behind us, marking our path clearly. We spaced the markers every 50 feet, making sure they were visible from one to the next. By the time we finished, we'd created a clear, unmistakable trail leading back the way we'd come. We set up our tent in the clearing and made dinner on our camp stove. Neither of us talked much. We were both trying to process what was happening, trying to find a rational explanation for terrain that didn't match our maps, for GPS coordinates that placed us in impossible locations. As darkness fell, I noticed something else that was wrong. The stars. I'm not an astronomer, but I know the basic constellations. I know where the Big Dipper should be, where the North Star should be. But when I looked up at the night sky, the stars were wrong. Not entirely wrong. I could still find familiar patterns, but they were in the wrong positions, rotated somehow, like the entire sky had been shifted a few degrees. "Tess," I said quietly, "look at the stars." She looked up, and I watched her face as she processed what she was seeing. "That's not possible," she whispered. "I know. The stars don't move like that. Not in a single day. Not ever." We sat in silence, staring up at the impossible sky. And then, from somewhere in the forest to the east, we heard a sound that made our blood run cold. It was a voice, a human voice, calling out coordinates. 45 degrees, 16 minutes, 32 seconds north. 110 degrees, 42 minutes, 18 seconds west. It was Tess's voice. Perfect in every detail. But Tess was sitting right next to me and she wasn't speaking. We looked at each other, both of us frozen. The voice called out again. The same coordinates, in the same tone, coming from somewhere just beyond our firelight. "That's not me," Tess whispered. "I know." The voice called out a third time, and this time I recognized the coordinates. They were the coordinates for our campsite, the exact position where we were sitting. "We need to document this," Tess said, pulling out her GPS. But when she turned it on, the screen showed something that made no sense. According to the GPS, we were no longer at the campsite. We were 3 miles south, back at the location where we'd camped the previous night. "That's impossible," Tess said. "We've been sitting here for 2 hours. We haven't moved." She reset the GPS, and when it powered back on, it showed a different location. This time we were 2 miles north, at tomorrow's planned campsite. She reset it again. This time we were east, then west. Each time showing a different location, different coordinates, but we hadn't moved. We were still sitting at our campfire, in the same clearing, in the same forest. "Something is wrong with the satellites," Tess said, but I could hear the doubt in her voice. She didn't believe that any more than I did. We stayed up most of the night, taking turns on watch, listening for more voices. Around 3 in the morning, I heard my own voice calling from the west, reading off a different set of coordinates. Then Tess heard her voice again, this time from the north, calling out compass bearings. When dawn finally came, we were exhausted but relieved. Whatever was happening seemed to be confined to the night. In daylight, things would make sense again. We packed up our gear and prepared to head back the way we'd come. Tess wanted to abort the survey, get back to the ranger station, and report what we'd experienced. I agreed completely. We found the first orange flag we'd placed on the trail. It was exactly where we'd left it, tied to a pine tree about 50 feet from our camp. We followed it to the second flag, then the third. But when we reached the fourth flag, we realized something was wrong. The flag was pointing in a different direction. Not just a little different, completely different. We'd tied the flags to mark the trail heading south, back the way we'd come. But this flag was marking a trail heading east. Did we tie this wrong? I asked. Tess shook her head. No, I checked each one. They were all pointing south. We continued to the fifth flag. It was pointing north. The sixth was pointing west. Each flag was still in place, still tied to the same tree, but they were marking trails heading in completely different directions. The flags didn't move, Tess said slowly. The trails moved. Trails don't move. I know, but look at them. The flags are where we place them, but the trails they're marking are different trails. We stood there, trying to understand what we were seeing. The orange flags were unchanged, but the trails themselves, the paths through the forest, they were different. Routes that had been heading south now headed east. Routes that had climbed now descended. It was like the entire landscape had been rearranged during the night, and our trail markers had stayed in place while everything else shifted around them. Tess pulled out her GPS, and I watched her face go pale as she looked at the screen. What? I asked. The GPS is showing our route. The route we hiked yesterday, but it's showing it in a different location. According to this, we should be 5 miles west of where we actually are. Could the GPS be wrong? I don't know. Maybe. But if it is, I don't know how to navigate out of here. The compass, the GPS, the map, they all disagree with each other now. And they all disagree with what we're actually seeing. I pulled out my own compass and watched the needle spin slowly, never quite settling on any particular direction. Tess's compass was doing the same thing. We're lost, I said quietly. No, Tess said, but her voice was uncertain. We can't be lost. We know where we started. We know what direction we need to go. We just need to figure out which instruments to trust. But that was the problem. We couldn't trust any of our instruments. The GPS showed us in impossible locations. The compasses wouldn't settle. The map didn't match the terrain. And the trail markers we'd placed ourselves were now pointing in random directions. We made a decision. We'd pick one direction, north, according to the sun, and we'd walk in a straight line until we hit something we recognized. A road, a river, a landmark, anything that would help us orient ourselves. We walked for 6 hours. The sun moved across the sky in the right direction, which was comforting. At least we could trust that. But everything else was wrong. The valleys ran in wrong directions. The peaks were wrong shapes. We'd passed the same distinctive rock formation 3 times even though we were walking in a straight line. Around 2 in the afternoon, we came to a clearing and stopped to rest. Tess pulled out her GPS one more time. Look at this, she said, showing me the screen. I looked. The GPS was showing our current location, but the coordinates were identical to the coordinates from our campsite last night. Different terrain, same coordinates. That's impossible, I said. I know, but look. She scrolled through the GPS history, showing me all the waypoints we'd marked over the past 6 hours of hiking. Every single waypoint showed the same coordinates. 6 hours of walking, and according to the GPS, we hadn't moved at all. I felt a wave of vertigo wash over me. How is that possible? It's not, Tess said. Unless what? She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the GPS screen. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. Unless we're not moving through space the way we think we are. Unless the terrain is shifting around us faster than we can walk through it. Like a treadmill. We're moving, but we're not going anywhere. I wanted to tell her that was crazy, that landscapes don't work like that, that there had to be a rational explanation. But I couldn't. Because deep down, I knew she was right. Something about this place, this section of wilderness, didn't follow normal rules. Space didn't work here the way it was supposed to, and if space didn't work right, then all our instruments, all our navigation tools, all our carefully documented routes and waypoints were useless. We were trapped in a landscape that was rearranging itself around us, and we had no way to find our way out. We set up our emergency bivouac in the clearing and tried to think rationally about our situation. Tess spread out her paper map and began marking every location where the GPS had shown impossible coordinates. She created a list of observations. GPS coordinates remained constant despite us moving. Trail markers changed orientation overnight. Stars appeared in wrong positions. Terrain didn't match topographic maps. Compasses unable to settle on consistent bearing. Same landmarks appearing multiple times in different locations. What if we're overthinking this? I suggested. What if there's a simpler explanation? Magnetic anomaly, GPS satellite error, maybe we're just turned around? Tess looked at me with exhausted eyes. We're not turned around, Rowan. I know you want a simple answer, but there isn't one. I've navigated through worse terrain than this. I've navigated under fire and sandstorms in Afghanistan. I know how to read a map, I know how to use a compass, and I know when something is fundamentally wrong. She was right, but I couldn't accept it. Accepting it meant accepting that we were trapped in a place where the basic laws of physics didn't apply, and that was too much to process. We need to try a different approach, I said. Stop relying on instruments. Navigate by natural features. Find water. Follow it downstream. Water always flows downhill, always reaches lower elevations eventually. If we follow a stream, we'll eventually hit the valley floor, then we can follow the valley to civilization. Tess nodded slowly. That's actually not a bad idea. Water follows gravity, and gravity is constant. It's one thing we can trust. We spent the next hour searching for water. We found a small creek about half a mile from our position and began following it downstream. The water flowed consistently, which was reassuring. We marked our path with bright orange flags every 100 feet, creating a clear trail back to our starting point just in case. But after 2 hours of following the creek, we made a discovery that shattered even this small hope. The creek looped back on itself. We reached a section where we'd already placed flags, meaning we'd walked in a complete circle, even though the water had been flowing consistently downstream the entire time. A creek can't flow in a circle. Water doesn't work that way, but somehow this one did. Tess sat down heavily on a rock next to the creek and put her head in her hands. This isn't possible, she said. Water doesn't flow uphill. It can't. But we just followed this creek downstream for 2 hours and ended up back where we started, which means the water somehow flowed uphill at some point. Unless we're the ones who moved uphill without realizing it, I suggested. We'd have noticed. We're both experienced hikers. We know when we're climbing versus descending. We went downhill the whole way. I sat down next to her, and we watched the water flow past us, heading downstream to nowhere, defying every law of physics we thought we understood. We're running low on food, Tess said after a while. We've got maybe 2 more days of rations. 3 if we stretch them. Someone will come looking for us eventually, I said. When we don't check in on Sunday, They'll send a search party. And how will they find us if we're in a place where space doesn't work right? They'll have the same problems we do. GPS coordinates won't help them. Trail markers won't help them. They could walk right past us and never know we're here. She was right, and we both knew it. But I didn't want to think about that possibility yet. That night, we set up camp next to the Impossible Creek. We took turns on watch again, both of us exhausted but too afraid to sleep. Around midnight, I heard voices again. Multiple voices this time, all of them familiar. My voice, calling out compass bearings. Tessa's voice, reading GPS coordinates. Other voices, too. Voices I didn't recognize, but voices that sounded human, sounded real. All of them calling out navigation data in the darkness. 45 degrees north, 7,200 feet elevation. Bearing 270. Waypoint 17. It was like the forest itself had become a navigation system, constantly broadcasting position data that meant nothing. Or maybe it meant everything, and we just couldn't understand the code. As I sat there listening to the chorus of voices calling out coordinates and bearings, I noticed something else. The campfire was behaving strangely. The smoke was rising straight up, which was normal, but then it would stop at about 10 feet above the flames and start flowing horizontally, like it had hit an invisible ceiling. Then it would drop back down, pool around us for a moment, and rise again, repeating the cycle over and over. Smoke doesn't pool. Smoke rises and disperses. But this smoke was moving in ways that violated basic thermodynamics. I woke Tess and showed her. She watched the smoke for a long moment, then checked her thermometer. 53 degrees, she said. Same temperature it was 3 hours ago. Same temperature it's been since sunset. So the temperature should be dropping. It's late October in Montana at 7,000 feet elevation. It should be in the 30s by now, but it's been holding steady at 53 degrees for hours. She checked the thermometer again, tapped it, held it up to the firelight to see if maybe it was broken, but the reading didn't change. Time isn't passing right here, she said quietly. Or temperature isn't changing right, or both. Something about this place. It's not just space that's wrong. It's everything. We sat in silence for a while, watching the smoke pool and rise, pool and rise. Then Tess spoke again. I've been thinking about the voices, the ones calling out coordinates. What about them? What if they're other people? Other hikers, other rangers, other people who got lost in this place. What if they're all still here, scattered across impossible terrain, all calling out their positions, trying to be found? Then where are they? We haven't seen anyone. Maybe we're not in the same version of the terrain. Maybe this place has multiple versions of itself, all overlapping, and we're in one version while they're in others. We can hear them, but we can't see them because we're not occupying the same space. It sounded insane, but it made as much sense as anything else we'd experienced. If that's true, then how do we get out? I don't know. Maybe we don't. Maybe this place just keeps people, traps them in these overlapping versions of terrain that don't quite connect. I don't accept that, I said firmly. There has to be a way out. We just need to figure out the pattern, figure out the rules this place follows. What if there are no rules? What if this place is just chaos? I didn't have an answer for that. We tried to sleep in shifts, but neither of us got more than a few minutes of rest. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear more voices, more coordinates, more bearings. And when I opened my eyes, I'd see the smoke doing impossible things. Or I'd notice that the stars had shifted again. Or I'd realize that the creek was flowing in a different direction than it had been an hour ago. When dawn finally came, we made a decision. We'd stop trying to navigate out. Instead, we'd stay in one place and wait for rescue. We'd build a signal fire, lay out bright orange panels in a clearing, and hoped that a search helicopter would spot us from the air. We spent the morning gathering wood for a signal fire. We built it in the largest clearing we could find, stacking it high and dousing it with white gas from our camp stove to make sure it would produce thick, visible smoke. Then we laid out our emergency panels, bright orange tarps designed to be visible from aircraft, in a large X pattern. By noon, everything was ready. We lit the signal fire and watched as thick white smoke rose into the clear blue sky. It was visible for miles, or at least it should have been. We waited. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. No helicopter came. No search plane appeared on the horizon. Around 3 in the afternoon, Tess pulled out her GPS one more time. She'd been checking it obsessively, documenting every impossible reading, building a database of contradictions. "Rowan," she said, her voice strange. "Look at this." I walked over and looked at her GPS screen. The position marker was moving, not jumping around like it had before, but moving smoothly, continuously, like we were in a vehicle traveling at high speed. But we were standing still. "We're moving," Tess said. "Or the world is moving around us. Look at the speed indicator. It says we're traveling at 30 miles per hour. I looked at the surrounding forest. Nothing was moving. The trees were stationary. The creek was flowing at its normal pace, but according to the GPS, we were moving rapidly across the landscape. Tess checked her compass. The needle was spinning slowly, continuously, like it was trying to track our movement but couldn't keep up. "We're orbiting something," she said suddenly. "That's what this is. We're moving in a circle at high speed, but from our perspective, we're stationary and the world is rotating around us. That's not possible. Nothing about this is possible, but it's happening anyway. Look." She showed me the GPS track log. Over the past 10 minutes, we'd traveled in a perfect circle, roughly 2 miles in diameter, returning to our starting position every 4 minutes. I felt dizzy thinking about it. If we were moving at 30 miles per hour but couldn't feel it, what did that mean? Were we moving through space, or was space moving through us? "This is why we can't get out," Tess said, her voice tight. "We're caught in some kind of orbit, like a drain. We can walk anywhere we want, but we're always being pulled back to the same center point. That's why we keep seeing the same landmarks. That's why the GPS coordinates don't change. We're not moving through the landscape. We're moving with it, around some central point we can't escape." "Then how do we break out of the orbit?" "I don't know. Maybe we can't. Maybe this place caught us, and now we're just going to keep spinning around this invisible center point forever." I refused to accept that. There had to be a way. If we were orbiting something, then maybe we could find the center, find what we were orbiting around. Maybe that would give us answers. "We need to move perpendicular to our current direction," I said. "If we're orbiting, then moving perpendicular should take us either toward the center or away from it." Tess thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "It's worth trying." We checked her GPS to determine which direction we were currently moving, even though we couldn't feel it, then started walking at a 90-degree angle to that direction. Tess kept checking the GPS every few minutes, monitoring our position. At first, nothing changed. The GPS continued to show us moving in a circle, but after about 30 minutes of walking, something shifted. The circle we were moving in became smaller. We were spiraling inward, toward whatever center point we'd been orbiting. "It's working," Tess said. "We're getting closer to the center." "What do you think is at the center?" "I don't know. But whatever it is, it's what's causing all of this. The impossible terrain, the shifting trails, the voices. It all radiates from that point." We continued walking, moving steadily inward. The GPS circle got smaller and smaller. 2 miles, 1 mile, half a mile. And then we reached it. The center was a clearing. A perfectly circular clearing about 50 feet in diameter, with no trees, no vegetation, just bare rock. And in the exact center of the clearing was a cairn, a stack of rocks about 4 feet high. But this wasn't a normal trail cairn. The rocks weren't stacked randomly. They were arranged in a very specific pattern, and carved into each rock was a set of coordinates. Different coordinates on each rock, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all carved with precision. "What is this?" I whispered. Tess walked closer, examining the carvings. "These are all coordinates in this region. Look, here's one for the ranger station. Here's one for the trailhead where we started. Here's one for each of our planned campsites." "Who carved these?" "I don't know. But look at the weathering. Some of these carvings are old, really old, years, maybe decades. But some are new, recent." I walked around the cairn, reading the coordinates, and then I found one that made my blood run cold. It was carved more recently than the others, the edges still sharp, and it showed the coordinates for our current position, the clearing where we were standing. And below those coordinates, carved in smaller letters, was a date. Yesterday's date. "Tess," I said quietly, "someone was here yesterday. Someone carved these coordinates yesterday." "That's impossible. We would have seen their tracks." I looked around the clearing. She was right. The ground was undisturbed, no footprints, no signs that anyone had been here recently. But the carving was fresh. I could see that clearly. "Maybe they weren't here physically," I suggested. "Maybe they were here the same way we hear those voices, present but not present, in a different version of the terrain." Tess was about to respond when her GPS started beeping. She looked at the screen and her face went pale. "What?" I asked. "The GPS. It's showing multiple position markers. Not just us. There are at least a dozen other markers appearing on the screen, all at different locations, but all of them are clustered around this clearing." I looked at her screen. She was right. Position markers were appearing and disappearing, moving in erratic patterns, all centered on where we were standing. "Those are other people," Tess whispered. "Other people caught in the same thing we're caught in. They're all orbiting this point, just like we were, all of them trapped." I looked at the cairn with its hundreds of carved coordinates, and I understood. Each set of coordinates represented a person. Someone who'd gotten lost in this place. Someone who'd found this center point. Someone who'd carved their position into the stone before... Before what? Before they disappeared. Before they got absorbed into the landscape like the voices we'd been hearing. "We need to leave," I said. "Right now. If this is the center, if this is what's causing everything, then we need to get away from it." But as I said it, I realized something terrifying. We'd spiraled inward to reach this point, which meant to escape, we'd need to spiral outward. And I had no idea how to do that. No idea if it was even possible. Tess was thinking the same thing. When we walked perpendicular to our orbit, we moved inward. So if we want to move outward, we need to walk. She paused, calculating. We need to walk in the same direction as our orbit, with the rotation instead of against it. It sounded like nonsense, but it was the only theory we had. We left the clearing, moving in what the GPS indicated was the same direction as our orbital movement. And slowly, gradually, the GPS track showed our orbit getting wider. We were spiraling outward, away from the center. It took hours. The sun was setting by the time Tess's GPS showed us back at the same 2-mile diameter we'd been at originally. But we kept walking, kept moving with the rotation, trying to spiral further and further out. And then, just as full darkness fell, something changed. The voices stopped. The GPS coordinates stabilized. The compass needle settled on north and stayed there. We checked our position against the paper map, and for the first time in days, everything matched. The terrain, the elevation, the landmarks, it all matched. We were out. We didn't stop walking. Even though it was dark, even though we were exhausted, we kept moving, putting as much distance between ourselves and that clearing as possible. We walked through the night, using our headlamps, following the trail that now made sense again, that now led in the direction it was supposed to lead. By dawn, we'd covered maybe 8 miles. We were well outside the affected area, back in terrain that followed normal rules. We could see our breath in the cold morning air, could see the sun rising in the east where it was supposed to rise, could use our compasses and GPS and maps and have them all agree with each other. We were so relieved we almost cried, but we weren't safe yet. We were low on food, exhausted, and still miles from the nearest ranger station. We needed to keep moving. Over the next 2 days, we hiked out of the wilderness, following trails we recognized, seeing landmarks that made sense. We finally reached the ranger station on Saturday afternoon, 3 days after we'd escaped the affected area. The ranger on duty, a guy named Marcus, was shocked to see us. "We were about to send a search party," he said. "You missed your check-in on Thursday." "We got turned around," Tess said, which was the understatement of the century. "Equipment malfunctions." Marcus nodded sympathetically. "Yeah, we've been getting reports of GPS issues in that sector. Something about solar activity interfering with satellite signals. Did you have problems with your GPS?" Tess and I looked at each other. "Yeah," I said, "GPS problems." We filed our report, but we kept it vague. Equipment malfunctions, navigation difficulties, nothing that would sound too crazy. We didn't mention the impossible terrain, the voices, the cairn with its hundreds of carved coordinates. We didn't mention orbiting an invisible center point at 30 miles per hour while standing still, because who would believe us? After we'd debriefed, showered, and eaten real food for the first time in days, Tess and I met privately. She spread out her notes, all her GPS logs, all her observations. "We need to report this properly," she said. "The real version. What actually happened." "To who?" "Marcus? He'll think we lost our minds." Then to someone higher up, the regional director. Someone at the Forest Service headquarters. Someone needs to know that there's a section of wilderness where space doesn't work right, where people can get trapped in impossible terrain. I thought about it for a long moment. You saw the GPS. There were at least a dozen other position markers near that cairn, which means at least a dozen other people are still there, still trapped, still orbiting that point. Exactly, which means we have a responsibility to report it, to try to save them. I wanted to argue with her, but I couldn't. She was right, we'd gotten out, but others were still there, still lost in a landscape that rearranged itself at night, still carving their coordinates into stones, still calling out navigation data that no one would hear. We requested a meeting with the regional director and told him everything. Every detail, no matter how impossible it sounded. We showed him Tess's GPS logs, her notes, her documentation of the contradictory readings. He listened quietly, asked a few questions, then told us he'd look into it. We never heard back from him. Over the next few weeks we tried to follow up, tried to push for an investigation, tried to get someone to take it seriously. But we were stonewalled at every level. The official position was that we'd experienced equipment malfunctions due to solar activity, had gotten disoriented, and had made it out safely. No further investigation was needed. Tess was furious. She filed formal complaints, demanded action, threatened to go to the media. But nothing happened. If anything, our complaints made things worse. We were quietly reassigned to different sectors, separated, moved to positions where we wouldn't be working together anymore. I was sent to a desk job in Billings. Tess was transferred to a remote station in Idaho. The message was clear: stop asking questions, stop making noise. or there would be consequences. But Tess wouldn't let it go. She spent her off time researching, digging through old records, looking for similar incidents. And she found them. Dozens of them going back decades. She'd call me every few weeks with updates. A missing hiker in 1983 whose last known position was near that sector. A ranger in 1995 who'd reported GPS malfunctions and impossible terrain before disappearing. A search and rescue team in 2004 that spent 3 days lost in a 2-mile area, reporting the same phenomena we'd experienced. It's been happening for years, Tess told me during one call. The Forest Service knows about it. They have to know. But they're not doing anything. They're just covering it up, reassigning anyone who asks too many questions. Why would they cover it up? Because they don't know how to fix it. They don't understand what's causing it. So instead of admitting there's a problem they can't solve, they just pretend it doesn't exist. I thought about those position markers we'd seen on Tess's GPS. All those people still trapped, still orbiting that impossible center point. We have to do something, I said. Like what? Go back, document it properly, get video evidence, photographs, something they can't ignore. There was a long pause. That's crazy, Rowan. We barely made it out the first time. If we go back, we might not be that lucky again. Then we don't go back. But we need to warn people, put up signs, close the trails, something. I've tried, nobody will listen. I felt helpless. We'd experienced something impossible, had documented it as thoroughly as we could, and no one cared. The Forest Service was content to let people wander into that affected area, get lost, get trapped, disappear into a landscape that didn't follow the rules of normal reality. I quit the Forest Service 6 months later. Couldn't handle the desk job, couldn't handle knowing that people were still getting lost in that sector and nobody was doing anything about it. I moved to Missoula, got a job with a local search and rescue volunteer organization, tried to build a normal life. But I never forgot, and neither did Tess. She kept investigating, kept collecting reports, kept building her case. And in the summer of 2017, 2 years after our experience, she called me with news. "I'm going back," she said. "What? Tess, no. You said it yourself, it's too dangerous." I know what I said, but I can't live with this anymore. There are people trapped there, Rowan. People who are still alive, still conscious, still experiencing those impossible orbits. I can hear them in my head sometimes, their voices, calling out coordinates, and I know it's not just memory. They're really there, and they need help. Then let's organize a proper expedition. Get funding, get equipment, get a team together. There's no time. The affected area is growing. I've been tracking it using GPS reports from hikers in the area. What used to be contained to maybe 5 square miles is now closer to 10. In another year, it could be 20. In 5 years, it could cover the entire sector. I felt cold. You think it's expanding? I know it is. Whatever's at that center point, whatever that cairn represents, it's getting stronger. The orbit is pulling in more space, trapping more people. If we don't do something now, this whole region could become impossible terrain. I wanted to tell her she was being paranoid, that she was reading too much into it. But I couldn't, because I'd felt it too. That pull, that sense that something was fundamentally wrong with that place, and it was getting worse. "When?" I asked. "Next week. I've got a week of leave approved. I'm going in alone unless you want to come with me." "Of course I'm coming with you. You think I'd let you do this alone?" We met in Red Lodge a week later. Tess had equipment I'd never seen before. Specialized GPS units, radiation detectors, magnetic field sensors. She'd also brought a video camera and multiple backup power supplies. "We're going to document everything," she said. "Every step, every anomaly, every impossible thing we encounter. And this time we're going to make sure someone sees it." We started our hike on a Tuesday morning, following the same route we'd taken 2 years earlier. The weather was similar. Clear, cool, perfect hiking conditions. But as we got deeper into the wilderness, I started to feel that familiar sense of unease. The trees looked wrong. The valleys ran in wrong directions, and our equipment started showing the first signs of malfunction. By the second day, we were back in impossible terrain. The GPS showed us in multiple locations simultaneously. The compass needles spun without settling, and we started hearing the voices again. But this time, Tess was documenting everything. She recorded the GPS readings, filmed the impossible behavior of our compasses, captured audio of the voices calling out coordinates in the darkness. She was building an undeniable case, proof that something was fundamentally wrong in this sector. On the third day, we found the clearing with the cairn, but it had changed. The pile of rocks was taller now, maybe 6 feet high instead of 4, and there were more coordinates carved into the stones. Dozens more, and all of them were recent, carved within the past 2 years. Tess filmed everything, documenting each set of coordinates, cross-referencing them with missing person reports she'd collected. Each carving matched a person. Each person had disappeared in this sector between 2015 and 2017. "They're all here," Tess whispered, her voice breaking. "Everyone who's gone missing. They're all still here, trapped, orbiting this point, just like we were." And then I saw something that made me grab her arm. On the side of the cairn facing us, there was a new carving. Fresh, the stone dust still white in the grooves. 2 sets of coordinates, one labeled R, one labeled T. Our coordinates, our names. "We need to leave," I said, "right now." But it was too late. I looked at Tess's GPS and saw what I'd feared. We were already orbiting, already caught. The screen showed us moving in a circle around the cairn, 30 miles per hour, our orbit slowly tightening. "Run!" Tess shouted. "Move perpendicular! Break the orbit!" We ran, crashing through the forest, moving at right angles to our orbital direction. But the GPS showed our orbit tightening faster than we could spiral outward. The circle was shrinking, pulling us back towards the center. And then I understood. The first time, we'd stumbled into the affected area by accident. We'd been caught in an outer orbit, far enough from the center that we could still escape. But this time, we'd walked directly to the center. We'd started our orbit from the inside. There was no spiraling out from here. We were already too close. Tess understood it too. I could see the realization in her eyes. She stopped running and turned to face me. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should never have asked you to come back. It's not your fault. We made this choice together." She pulled out her video camera, made sure it was recording, then set it down on a rock facing the cairn. "What are you doing?" "Leaving a record. Someone will find it eventually. Maybe not soon, but eventually. And when they do, they'll know the truth. They'll know what happened here." We sat down next to the camera and waited. There was nothing else to do. We were trapped in an orbit that was tightening with every pass, pulling us closer and closer to the center point. As darkness fell, I heard more voices join the chorus. New voices, recent voices, all calling out their coordinates. All the people who'd been trapped here over the past 2 years, their consciousness somehow persisting, somehow calling out their positions even though their bodies had long since disappeared. And I realized with horror that we'd become part of that chorus. That soon our voices would join theirs, calling out coordinates in the darkness, marking our position on stones that no one would ever find, orbiting an impossible center point forever. Tess reached over and took my hand. "At least we're together," she said. I squeezed her hand. "Yeah, at least we're together." The orbit tightened, the cairn drew closer. And as we spiraled toward that center point, toward whatever impossible thing waited there, I felt my sense of self beginning to fragment. I could feel my consciousness splitting, spreading out across multiple points in space and time, existing in several places at once. I was sitting next to Tess, holding her hand. I was standing at the cairn, carving coordinates into stone. I was walking through the forest, calling out bearings into the darkness. I was everywhere and nowhere, trapped in a landscape that folded back on itself, trapped in an orbit that had no escape. The last thing I remember thinking, before I ceased to be Rowan and became just another voice calling out coordinates, was this: the map didn't change at night. We did. We became part of the map, part of the impossible terrain, part of the landscape that rearranged itself. Our consciousness spread out across the affected area, marking trails that went nowhere, creating the impossible geography that would trap others the way we'd been trapped. We became the thing we'd been trying to escape, and now we're still there, still orbiting, still calling out our positions. If you listen carefully in that sector of the Absarokas, on quiet nights when the stars are in wrong positions and the compass needles spin without settling, you might hear us. 45 degrees, 16 minutes, 32 seconds north. 110 degrees, 42 minutes, 18 seconds west. We're the map now. We're the terrain. We're the voices warning others not to make the same mistake we made. But no one ever listens. They never do. Sometimes, in what I perceive as moments of clarity, though time means nothing here. I wonder if Tess's camera is still there on that rock, still recording. I wonder if the battery lasted long enough to capture what happened to us. I wonder if someone will find it and understand. But I know they won't. Because even if they find the footage, even if they see us sitting there as our orbit tightened, even if they hear our last words, they'll rationalize it. Equipment malfunction. Psychological breakdown. Anything but the truth. The truth is too impossible to accept. I can feel new people entering the affected area sometimes. I can sense when they first notice something's wrong, when their GPS starts showing impossible readings, when their trail markers begin pointing in different directions. And I call out to them, trying to warn them. But my voice has become just another coordinate, just another piece of navigation data that means nothing to those who hear it. The cairn grows taller with each person who gets trapped. More coordinates carved into more stones, and the orbit grows wider, pulling in more terrain, transforming more wilderness into impossible geography. Tess was right. The affected area is expanding, and there's nothing anyone can do to stop it, because this isn't a place anymore. It's a process, a transformation, turning space into something that doesn't follow the rules, turning people into coordinates, turning consciousness into terrain. And we're part of it now.